Chapter 132. Who else is unconvinced? Ling Han stopped and asked with a smile. Everyone shook their heads in unison. This guy was too fierce, and anyone below Gushing Spring Tier was not qualified to fight him. A few Gushing Spring Tier martial artists humphed. They were not afraid of Ling Han, but they were wary of Lu Yutong. Now this girl had a sword in her hand and was guarding Ling Han, so no one dared to act rashly. Most importantly, they were not in the mood to argue with Ling Han. That stock of spiritual medicine ran into that mysterious area, and the most important thing now was how to get it out. More and more people surged over and surrounded the area. This could be the central area of the whole underground space. It formed a circle and occupied quite a large area. Most importantly, that pitch-black area swallowed all light as if it was solid, blocking one's line of sight. Standing on one end, one couldn't see the other. Thankfully, there were enough people that came in and could barely surround this area. At least, if that stock of spiritual medicine ran out, they would be able to discover it immediately. What do we do now? After surrounding it, everyone was in a dilemma. Trap it, I don't believe it won't come out, someone said. Are you stupid? That was originally a stalk of grass, and could definitely take root in there for a few years or even a few hundred years. But what about us? We have to leave in at most 3 days, someone scolded. That's true, that person said sheepishly. Everyone frowned. That was definitely a stock of spiritual medicine, even reaching the legendary level of spiritual medicine, but they could only stare at it, which made them feel like they were going crazy. Someone went out to contact the old monsters outside, hoping that they would have some solution, while the others stayed here to guard. Ling Han slowly approached that invisible wall and stretched out his hand to feel it. What a familiar feeling. A smile appeared on Ling Han's lips. In the past, he had entered many historical sites and seen many similar situations. This was also why he had warned in advance. This was not a wall but a kind of aura that surpassed Heaven Tier. If he was still in Heaven Tier, then with his research on this kind of aura, he could do his best to break through and let himself pass, but now he did not have the right to do so. Could it be that I can only use that? Ling Han took out the broken blade. This was his disciple's treasured blade, and it might also be the only relic that could be found at present. If the remaining power of the spiritual tool was fully unleashed, it should be able to just barely activate the power of the Heaven Tier. However, the problem was that this treasured saber would be completely destroyed. Ling Han hesitated, and there was another problem. This saber could only be used once, so how was he going to get out after going in? But after a moment, he made up his mind to go in. It was because not only were there divine medicines here, it should also hide the secrets of the great battle of the past. He wanted to know why. Moreover, if there really was the remains of a shattering void tier elite inside that formed this aura, then he might have a way to dispel it. You two cover for me, Ling Han said to Lu Yutong and Li Xichan. Because this area was very big, everyone stood about 10 meters apart surrounding this area. Thus, Ling Han stood in the middle of the two girls, and if the people on the two sides didn't pay attention, it would be very difficult to notice him. The two girls didn't know what he wanted to do, but they both nodded, knowing that this guy had abilities that normal people couldn't. Ling Han began to revive the treasured saber. Zhang Yufeng's martial art intent was inherited from him, and although he was still very weak now, they were of the same origin. Under the guidance of his divine sense, the martial art intent in the treasured saber also began to awaken. Wang, the patterns on the treasured saber lit up one by one, extremely resplendent. But this was the last flash, and it would soon completely return to normal. Ling Han didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation, and used the treasured saber to break through the aura, opening a path for himself. Even so, his nerves were still extremely tense, and the treasured saber in his hand trembled like a swimming fish. His figure also swayed and he walked out a zigzag path. His figure instantly disappeared into that gloomy area, and was no longer seen. Lu Yutong and Li Xichan were both tongue-tied, and looked at each other. They could see the deep astonishment in each other's eyes, as well as deep admiration. This youth, no, this man, was there anything that he couldn't do? They quickly retracted their gazes and braced themselves, covering for Ling Han to prevent others from discovering his disappearance. Otherwise, if Ling Han really obtained some treasure with his current strength, he would definitely not be able to keep it. Ling Han's entire body was covered in sweat. This aura was filled with danger at every step. In the past, when he was still an elite of heaven tier, he only needed to take a single wrong step, and he would be severely injured. And with his current cultivation level of the 6th layer of Poly, this was practically like taking a grain out of a fire. The slightest mistake would cause his body to shatter, and he definitely wouldn't have another chance. But this made him even more excited. His expression was highly focused, and his eyes became incredibly bright. There was usually no difference between a genius and a lunatic. In his previous life he focused on alchemy, and once he started he would be like a lunatic. But in this life he put his focus on martial art, and similarly he also had a crazy side to him. It was just that he didn't have the chance to show it before. This kind of danger made his entire body shiver, but it also made him even more excited. Wandering between life and death, he felt the meaning of life, and his divine sense surged like the sea. He even had a feeling that perhaps he could train his divine sense in this kind of dangerous place. The treasured saber's radiance began to flicker, and Ling Han was shocked. The state of this saber's damage was beyond his imagination. Could only last for so long, and it was about to collapse. Although he liked to take risks, taking risks and throwing away one's life were two different things. He hurriedly sped up. Because he had to calculate the changes in the aura, his spirit was also highly focused, and it was also highly exhausting. Sweat flowed down his entire body like water, instantly drenching his clothes, and even leaving a water stain under his feet. But he didn't feel it at all. His eyes were bright, and he continued to advance. Wang, the treasured saber, flickered one last time, and all the glyphs disappeared at the same time, shattering one after another. This represented the complete annihilation of the martial art willpower in the saber. Ling Han rushed out with a stride, and he finally walked out of the area sealed by the aura. Light once again appeared in front of him. This was an area with a circumference of only 100 feet. In the center, there was a skeleton sitting cross-legged on the ground, and that stalk of godly medicine was doing its best to take root in the soil. But the ground here seemed to be especially sturdy, and after so long, this stalk of godly medicine had actually only taken root halfway. Ling Han's eyes brightened, and he quietly walked towards this stalk of godly medicine. He didn't know if godly medicines had sides, but it was obvious that this stalk of godly medicine hadn't discovered him yet. 10 steps, 8 steps, 5 steps, 3 steps. Ling Han suddenly leaped out, and stretched out his hand to grab that stalk of godly medicine. Chapter 133. The godly medicine was trying its best to take root, and didn't think that someone would break through the blockade of the aura field and enter. Instantly, it was caught off guard by Ling Han, and hurriedly pulled out its roots to flee. However, it was a step too slow this time. Though its speed was indeed very fast, and it had already pulled out its roots, Ling Han's hand had also managed to grab hold of its roots in one move. The godly medicine seemed to have received a great shock. The blossoming flower instantly retracted all its petals, and even its stem was twisted and crooked. However, in the next instant it suddenly struggled and its figure actually flew out. It scuttled into the aura field, and instantly disappeared into the darkness. Ling Han was surprised and loosened his hand. 3 broken roots were left in his hand, and milky white liquid emerged from the broken parts. Instantly an indescribable fragrance filled the air, making his whole body feel comfortable, as if he was about to ascend to heaven. This was a godly medicine. Ling Han didn't dare to waste it, and hurriedly stuck out his tongue to suck the liquid dry. Wasting even a drop would be an unforgivable sin. It felt so good. Just smelling this godly medicine made him feel as if he was about to ascend to heaven, and after eating it, this feeling was naturally even stronger, making all the pores on his body open up. Spiritual chi automatically poured in, nourishing his body, and it was indescribably wonderful. Especially his divine sense, which received great nourishment, and his flesh, blood, tendons, and bones also improved to a considerable extent. Conversely, it was his cultivation that improved the slowest. The value of the godly medicine didn't lie in improving cultivation, Ling Han thought. He spread out his divine sense, and carefully observed the changes in his body. Vitality. He came to a conclusion. Under the nourishment of the godly medicine, his body's vitality was greatly improved. All martial artists knew that humans only had a lifespan of 100 years. Unless one reached the flower blossom tier, they could break through the limits of mortals and obtain an extra 200 years of lifespan. Otherwise, even if they ate some thousand-year-old ginseng, it would at most slow down their aging and allow them to live a few more years. The reason why flower blossom tier cultivators could obtain an extra 200 years of lifespan was because their body's vitality was strengthened. After breaking through to the flower blossom tier, every time one broke through to the next major tier, it would be a transformation of one's life. One would continuously obtain life force, and from there, the upper limit of one's lifespan would be continuously increased. Most importantly, there was a gap in martial art after the heaven tier. Since no one could reach the shattering void tier, then the maximum lifespan of a martial artist was limited to less than 1,000 years. Miraculous drugs have the same effect. He had only ingested a few drops of divine fluid, yet Ling Han's life force had already received a massive boost. As a former elite of the heaven tier, he could estimate that he had obtained an additional 20 years of lifespan, only a few drops in 18 years. If he could consume the entire stock of godly medicine, then how much lifespan would he be able to obtain? 1,000 years was at the very least. It was equivalent to letting an elite of the heaven tier live another lifetime, and for mortals that was 10 lifetimes. What is the most precious thing in this world? Not cultivation techniques, not martial techniques, not wealth, but life. An additional 1,000 years of lifespan. This would make even heaven tier elites go crazy. Ling Han stored the 3 stalks of godly medicine into his spatial ring. Increasing lifespan was only one of the effects of the godly medicine, and of course, it was also its greatest effect. However, there were other effects, such as improving one's physique and cleansing one's marrow. He possessed an immortal grade spirit base, but this did not mean that his physique was also immortal grade. On the contrary, his physique was very normal. It was only after cultivating the indestructible heaven scroll that his physique leaped to the body of dead tree, which instantly rivaled those with special physiques. In other words, his physique was still far from reaching a perfect state. There were at least 3 tiers of body of rock cliff, body of iron sheet, and body of diamond, and this was only the first layer of the indestructible heaven scroll. Godly medicine can have the effect of improving one's physique. Maybe I can use this to cultivate the body of rock cliff. Ling Han's eyes shone. If he could cultivate the body of rock cliff, not only would his defense be improved, he would also be able to condense an additional 2 drops of indestructible true fluid. With a total of 3 drops, he would have even more trump cards. What a pity, if there was a complete godly medicine, maybe I could instantly soar to the body of iron sheet, or even the body of diamond. He couldn't help but feel very regretful, but then he laughed and said to himself, one cannot be too greedy. In my last life, I didn't even see a level 9 precious medicine. Now, in the 6th layer of the poly, I not only saw a level 10 godly medicine, but also obtained 3 stalks of root hair. If I am still not satisfied with this, then I should be struck by lightning. He turned his gaze to the skeleton in the middle, and faintly felt that this was the source of everything. This skeleton had obviously experienced a great battle. At least 100 or so bones on its body were broken. It was hard to imagine how it could continue fighting with so many broken bones. He slowly approached and looked carefully, and couldn't help but be shocked. Among these bones there were actually golden characters. However, perhaps it was too long ago, or perhaps the injuries this person had suffered at that time were really too heavy, as these characters were almost completely dim and without light. But this didn't prevent Ling Han from comprehending the mighty power of these golden characters. Rather than saying they were characters, it would be better to say they were patterns, a kind of pattern that expressed the power of heaven and earth in the form of patterns and characters. Wait! Ling Han was startled. Actually, the indestructible heaven scroll is also like this, because I can't use words to repeat it. He suddenly came to a realization. No wonder he needed 10,000 years to comprehend the first layer of cultivation technique. That was because this completely surpassed the limits of words and reached another level. However, although I only took a glance, I can be sure that these golden characters on the bones are not comparable to the indestructible heaven scroll. The complexity of the two was completely different. But I can say with certainty that this is that elite of the shattering void tier. If I can get a glimpse of his martial art intent, it will definitely be greatly beneficial for me to break through to the shattering void tier in the future. Ling Han said to himself. He opened his eyes wide, trying to forcibly memorize these golden characters. Hong, a ball of red light suddenly surged out from the skeleton. It was extremely dazzling, and there was also a wave of heat that attacked, causing Ling Han to involuntarily take a few steps back. A ball of red flame appeared on top of the skeleton, forming various shapes as if it had a life of its own. Strange fire. Ling Han blurted out in surprise. Strange fire was a strange substance in the world, and could also be called energy. For martial artists and alchemists, its value was indescribably high, because after martial artists refined strange fire, they could temper their physique, increase their cultivation, and even cultivate some kind of powerful fire element martial arts technique. And after alchemists fused with strange fire, they would have a strong advantage in alchemical pill concoction. Why? Because the most important thing in alchemical pill concoction was controlling fire, but martial artists' power was limited, and there was a limit to the temperature of flames. Strange fire could increase this limit by a few times, allowing alchemists to have a wider space. For example, with Ling Han's ability, he could concoct alchemical pills up to heaven grade, but limited by his cultivation level, he couldn't do it, because he couldn't activate such a high temperature. But if he fused with a ball of strange fire, wanting to concoct heaven-grade alchemical pills now would still be just words, but it was very possible to concoct earth-grade alchemical pills. Even if he couldn't do it now, when he broke through to gushing spring tear, it would probably be enough. His eyes instantly lit up. Oh. Chapter 134. Ling Han felt that his luck in this life was definitely nature-defying. In his last life he was a heaven-tier elite, but no matter if it was godly medicine or strange fire, he didn't even see them. In this life, he was only in the 6th layer of Pali, yet he saw these two things and even obtained 3 roots of godly medicine. If he could also collect this strange fire, Ling Han's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. Strange fire could allow him to surpass his tier in pill concoction, and the strange fire's high temperature could also be used as a trump card. He was a bit curious as to how this strange fire was born. One had to know that there were many types of strange fire, but each had its own birth requirements. The most common strange fire was obviously born in volcanoes, but there were some special strange fires that were born in cold and gloomy places, or even in ice. They were called cold ice fire and could freeze and kill living things. But here, Ling Han couldn't think of any suitable conditions for the birth of strange fire here, aside from the skeleton in front of him. This skeleton was a Shattering Void tier elite when alive. Could it be that Shattering Void tier elites could also nurture strange fire? Ling Han thought, his eyes staring unblinkingly at that strange fire, thinking of how to collect it. If he still had heaven tier cultivation, then it obviously wouldn't be difficult and he could just forcibly suppress it. But now, with his cultivation of the 6th layer of Pali, if he forcibly went up to collect it, he'd probably be directly burned to ashes. Small fire, come, follow me from now on. Ling Han seemed to be beckoning a puppy. The strange fire changed shape, ignoring him completely. This was natural. How could a strange fire understand human speech? Ling Han gritted his teeth. If he used divine sense to communicate, he could surpass the language barrier. But the problem was, did he dare to use divine sense to touch the strange fire? The strange fire's might was enough to burn his divine sense to ashes. At least, the 1st layer of the indestructible heaven scroll couldn't repair divine sense. But for him to just give up on the strange fire, he couldn't do it. He racked his brains and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Could he get the Black Tower to help? He felt that the level of the Black Tower was above this Shattering Void tier elite, and was enough to suppress this strange fire. The problem was, though the Black Tower was residing in his body, it was an absolute boss, and was cold and indifferent to him, so could he be invited? Try it. He used his divine sense to guide the Black Tower, but Uncle Black was unperturbed, completely ignoring him. Ling Han was not discouraged in the slightest, and continued to use his divine sense to harass the Black Tower. Previously he had experience, and the Black Tower was not something that had no consciousness. Finally, the Black Tower trembled lightly, emitting a fluctuation. He didn't feel much, but more cracks appeared on the skeleton's bones, unable to endure the fluctuation of the Black Tower in the slightest. The strange flame was like a frightened little girl. It suddenly curled up into a ball and trembled. Ling Han's heart skipped a beat. He waved his hand at the heavenly flame and a shocking scene appeared. The heavenly flame actually jumped into his hand. What was even stranger was that Ling Han didn't feel like his hand was scalded at all. The strange flame indeed had a spirit. Ling Han gathered his courage and communicated with the heavenly flame, using his divine sense to transmit his thoughts, and said, "Little guy, follow me in the future. I will find more heavenly flames for you to fuse, and finally become the strongest flame in the world." Communicating through divine sense, this surpassed the limitations of language and race. As long as it had intelligence, it could be understood. Yeah. The heavenly flame transmitted a vague thought, like a babe learning how to speak, indistinct. Ling Han understood. This heavenly flame had indeed developed intelligence, but its intelligence was too low, like a newborn baby. A child should be easy to fool, right? Ling Han only released his goodwill and let the heavenly flame carry on with full consideration. In reality, he wasn't lying. If he encountered another heavenly flame in the future, he would definitely make a move and continuously fuse the heavenly flames he obtained, increasing the power of the heavenly flame. In the world, all living creatures had an instinctive desire to become stronger and more perfect, and heavenly flames were obviously no exception. They couldn't be cultivated, but they could fuse together, increasing their intelligence and power. Ling Han wasn't in a hurry, and continued to communicate with the heavenly flame. He had confidence because the Black Tower had shown its might just now, letting the heavenly flame feel his strength. A fine bird chose a tree to nest in, and the heavenly flame's intelligence was simple, and could be said to be extremely pure. Then, if it wanted to choose a master, whether it was strong or not would definitely be the first consideration. It didn't matter if Ling Han's tier wasn't high, as long as the Black Tower was awesome. The heavenly flame transmitted a vague thought, and suddenly burrowed into Ling Han's palm. Like water splashed into sand, it was immediately absorbed, and entered into Ling Han's body. Ling Han had never fused heavenly flames before, but in his last life, he had obtained the method of refining and fusing, so he wasn't unfamiliar with the next step. Now that the heavenly flame had entered his body, he had two choices. The first was to refine the heavenly flame, and erase the heavenly flame's intelligence, turning it into energy and nourishment to nourish him and improve him. The second was to fuse with the heavenly flame, and retain the heavenly flame's intelligence, as if turning his body into the heavenly flame's residence. For a martial artist, they would obviously choose the first method without hesitation, but how could Ling Han go back on his word? Even if it was against a ball of heavenly flame, what's more, he still needed to concoct alchemical pills, so of course keeping the heavenly flame intact was the best choice. He fused with the heavenly flame, and the little guy coiled in Ling Han's left hand, connecting with Ling Han through their souls. The Black Tower shook lightly, and had a might that could suppress the heavens, making the whole process exceptionally smooth. In less than half an hour, the fusion process was already completed. Ling Han opened his eyes and opened his left hand. A blazing red flame burned in his hand, but it was not activated by his origin power, but rather by the heavenly flame. Yay! The heavenly flame also emitted a cheerful thought, and seemed to be very satisfied with Ling Han's body. Go! Ling Han's left hand shook again, and the heavenly flame instantly flew out of his hand. Under the command of his divine sense, it continuously leaped and danced on the ground. He waved his hand again, and the heavenly flame flew back, merging into his left hand. Ha! Now my battle prowess has increased by another level. Under the burning of the heavenly flame, not to mention gushing spring tier warriors, even spiritual ocean tier warriors can be killed. However, how to get close is a problem. No one would be so idiotic as to let the heavenly flame get close to them. However, if I twine the heavenly flame around my fists or the edge of my sword, and others are careless and underestimate the enemy, then there's really a possibility that they'll be killed on the spot, whoever's that unlucky. Ling Han once again looked towards that skeleton. With a few shocks from the Black Tower, there were more and more cracks on the bones, and even the golden characters were indistinguishable, causing him to cry out in pain. That was the willpower of martial art on the level of Shattering Void tier. Forget it, I'm too greedy, Ling Han said. This time my gains are already indescribably great. Moreover, what's the use of giving me the willpower of martial art on the level of Shattering Void tier now? I can soar straight to the Heaven tier in the first place. The problem now is, how do I leave? Chapter 135. Old Man Wu, you do not need to concern yourself with this matter. Lian Guangzu waved his hand. This old man does not wish to destroy the many years of friendship between us. Bullshit. Wu Songlin directly rebuked. This brat has crippled someone after all, and must be punished by the academy's rules. Lian Guangzu's attitude also became unyielding. Isn't it just crippling a piece of trash? Wu Songlin said casually. Sir Wu, be careful with your words. Feng Yan interrupted, his tone actually carrying a threat. Who do you think you are to actually dare to rebuke this old man? Wu Songlin snorted, his right hand striking out, smashing towards Feng Yan. He was an elite of spiritual pedestal tier, and though this strike was a casual one, its power was extremely great. His origin power transformed into a large hand and smashed towards Feng Yan's face. Peng! Lian Guangzu moved in time, dispersing Wu Songlin's attack. He frowned and said, Old Man Wu, do you really want to go against this old man? As long as you don't touch him, this old man naturally can't be bothered to fight with you. Wu Songlin took a step back. Lian Guangzu stared at Wu Songlin, and Wu Songlin stared back at Lian Guangzu. The two old men, whose ages added up to more than 150 years old, glared at each other. All right, Old Man Wu, I'll give you face this time. Lian Guangzu nodded. Headmaster. Feng Yan said in dissatisfaction. Hung, take your younger brother and let's go. Can you still reattach your arms? Lian Guangzu frowned a little impatiently. Feng Yan did not dare to say another word. He could only pick up Feng Luo and leave with Lian Guangzu. Those two severed arms were naturally picked up by two of the four guardian deities, and they followed behind Lian Guangzu. A chaotic conflict came to an end just like that. Wu Songlin nodded slightly at Ling Han, and immediately left. There were too many people around, and he did not want to expose his relationship with Ling Han. He only wanted to let others know that Ling Han was under his protection. Brother Ling, if you don't mind, have a cup of tea with me? The eldest imperial prince asked, smiling at Ling Han. Ling Han smiled and said, Many thanks to the eldest imperial prince for lending a hand just now. Ling Han is very grateful. Please, please, the two of them left side by side. When they passed by Li Hao and Zhu Shui, Ling Han said, The two of you first go to the Heaven's Medicine Pavilion to look for Yuan Chu. Just tell him that it was I who asked you to go, and stay at his place for a while. Thank you, big brother Ling, Li Hao and Zhu Shui both said gratefully. Ling Han nodded. The reason why these two people had been targeted by Feng Luo was also because of him, so he definitely could not just stand by and watch. The eldest imperial prince brought Ling Han to a tea house and asked for a private room. That middle-aged man naturally stood guard outside the door, and there were only the eldest imperial prince and Ling Han inside the room. I've heard that Brother Ling is on very good terms with the various grandmasters of alchemy. Now that I've seen it for myself, it is indeed so, the eldest imperial prince said. There was a hint of wariness in his eyes, but there was also a hint of passion. Ling Han knew that because the third imperial prince had borrowed his limelight, he had managed to make a great many neutral parties who had been hesitating to side with him. The eldest imperial prince naturally could not sit still any longer, and wanted to extend an olive branch to him. Before this, alchemists were an extremely aloof group, and would definitely not interfere in the struggle for imperial power. But with Ling Han's appearance, a great many variables had suddenly appeared. Obtaining Ling Han's support was equivalent to obtaining the support of the entire group of alchemists in Rain Country. This was an incredibly terrifying power. Even if the current Rain Emperor wanted to pass on his position, he would have to think thrice before doing so. After all, this could possibly shake the very foundation of the empire. Thus, the eldest imperial prince also hoped to maintain a good relationship with Ling Han. Wu Songlin's previous attitude had further strengthened his resolve on this matter. Ling Han smiled and said, Does eldest imperial prince know what kind of methods that Feng Yan has mastered to be able to make Headmaster Lian be so biased towards him? The eldest imperial prince instantly frowned and revealed a furious expression. He could not help but slam the table and said, That rebellious official. He did not necessarily hate Feng Yan that much, but it was obvious that Feng Yan and Ling Han were sworn enemies. Thus, he naturally did not mind acting a little more exaggerated in order to draw closer to Ling Han. This person's physique is special, and his battle prowess is also considerably strong. But if it was just that, he would at most be able to obtain Lian Guangzu's recognition, and would definitely not be able to command him. But Feng Yan's attitude, though respectful on the surface, is actually as if he is Lian Guangzu's superior. How strange, Ling Han mumbled. The eldest imperial prince also sank into deep thought. What kind of power did Feng Yan have that he could actually make an elite of spiritual pedestal tier, a highly respected old headmaster, practically listen to his commands? As the eldest imperial prince of Rain Country, he actually knew absolutely nothing about this matter, which made him feel a faint sense of unease. I will investigate this matter, the eldest imperial prince said. Then he turned to Ling Han, and with a serious expression he said, Brother Ling is a smart man, so I will not beat around the bush and waste everyone's time. What does the eldest imperial prince want to say? Ling Han asked with a smile, though he already knew the eldest imperial prince's intentions. I would like to ask Brother Ling to help me ascend the throne, the eldest imperial prince said. Instantly, the air of a ruler burst forth, and his eyes shone with a dazzling light. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, What virtue or ability do I have to actually be able to help the eldest imperial prince ascend the throne? Ha ha ha. Brother Ling is too modest. The eldest imperial prince laughed loudly, and then immediately changed the topic. If I ascend the throne, the Ling clan will be a great contributor, and can be conferred the title of king with a different surname. King with a different surname? If these words were heard by the courtiers, they would definitely be so shocked that their scalps would go numb. In the history of Rain Country, there had never been a king with a different surname. This was definitely the highest honor that a courtier could receive. Thus, the eldest imperial prince's face was filled with anticipation. He believed that Ling Han would definitely agree immediately. However, he was soon disappointed, because there was not the slightest bit of change on Ling Han's face. His eyes were too clear and deep, as if the ambition of becoming an emperor was nothing more than a fleeting cloud in his eyes. Ling Han slowly opened his mouth and said, I have no interest in power at all. In his last life he was, after all, one of the strongest people in the world. What more when he was the Alchemy Emperor? How could the power and influence that he had in his grasp be something that a secular emperor could compare with? In this life he only had one goal, and that was to become a grandmaster of martial arts, shatter the void and become a god. The eldest imperial prince was originally a very eloquent person, but now he felt a kind of awkwardness that he did not know what to say. That was because he had already revealed all his trump cards, yet Ling Han did not even consider it for a moment. Could it be that he was going to hand over the imperial throne to Ling Han? Was that a joke? He thought for a moment, then said, Brother Ling, if I ascend the imperial throne, I will give you the possibility of breaking through to Flower Blossom tier. Ling Han could not help but have a strange expression on his face, and cast a glance at the eldest imperial prince. In Rain Country, because of the limitations of cultivation techniques, even the most talented person would not be able to break through to Flower Blossom tier. Thus, this promise of the eldest imperial prince could be said to be incredibly shocking. Perhaps even the ancestors of the 8 great clans would be moved. But for Ling Han, breaking through to Flower Blossom tier was nothing difficult at all. After all, he was an ultimate warrior of heaven tier in his last life. Though I do not know the specifics, but it should have something to do with the power of the nation, right? Ling Han was indeed a little curious, so he raised his eyebrows and said to the eldest imperial prince. The eldest imperial prince was instantly dumbfounded. Reading on one's phone was even more refreshing. Chapter 136. Oh. He really couldn't bear to part with it. Ling Han didn't refine it immediately. This kind of godly medicine had the life-saving effect of regrowing flesh and bones and reviving the dead, so he really couldn't bear to refine it just like that. But this was only a moment of hesitation. He had already cultivated the body of dead tree, and condensed a drop of indestructible true fluid, which had the miraculous effect of saving lives. Though it might be slightly inferior to the godly medicine, it had the advantage of being able to continue condensing after use. Moreover, as long as he cultivated the indestructible heaven scroll to the rock cliff tier, he would be able to condense another 2 drops of indestructible true fluid. The godly medicine would be gone after taking it, but the indestructible true fluid could be continuously condensed, so it was obvious which was more worthwhile. Moreover, the godly medicine could improve one's physique in all aspects and strengthen one's foundation. Those were real benefits. Ling Han didn't lack comprehension of cultivation level, what he lacked was time, and the godly medicine could very well make up for it. In this life, luck is all on my side. Ling Han tossed the root of this godly medicine into his mouth and chewed. Instantly, a fragrant aroma filled his mouth, and his whole body felt as if it were floating in the air. It was as if he was about to fly into the skies. Awesome! He thought as he circulated the indestructible heaven scroll, guiding the medicinal effect to flow into every part of his body. Changes occurred immediately. He could clearly feel that his cells were strengthening, his bones were strengthening, and his blood vessels were expanding, as if there was an ultimate elite that was cleansing him. Soon a layer of black stain appeared on his body. That was the impurities in his body, expelled from his body under the effect of the godly medicine. Don't underestimate this. Cultivation was a process of improving one's physique, and reaching the flower blossom tier was a qualitative change, shedding the mortal body and evolving to a higher level of life. It was like a stubborn rock, under polishing and refining, slowly turning into a fine jade. Expelling the impurities in one's body was equivalent to tempering oneself, speeding up the process of turning into jade. Such a change was very subtle, but the effect was extremely obvious. Ling Han could immediately feel that the spiritual qi entering his body was obviously flowing faster. This was very natural. The impurities in his meridians had decreased, which naturally allowed the spiritual qi to flow faster. Moreover, not only that, now that the spiritual qi's flow had increased, in the future when he circulated origin power it could also be sped up. The faster the elemental energy circulated, the stronger the destructive power of the attack. This was a real improvement. His life force was also constantly strengthening, and his divine sense had also improved to a certain extent. This made him feel that his mind was clear and his eyes were clear. His thinking became faster and clearer. Cool. Half a day later, he had completely refined this godly medicine's root. It's a pity that my cultivation hasn't improved at all, Ling Han sighed. But it didn't matter. He had taken the opportunity to cheat the Rain Country royalty and the 8 great clans to refine a large number of elixirs that could improve his cultivation. It wouldn't make much difference. He took out the second root of the godly medicine, consumed it, and continued to refine it. Hong long, this time, he felt the sound of thunder within his body. Every bone in his body was groaning, colliding. This time the medicinal power had penetrated deeply, and was undergoing a great transformation of the bones. On the contrary, the remodeling of his bones was incomparably painful. It was as if his entire body had to be shattered and then reforged. It was so painful that he kept twitching his teeth and sweating profusely. He let out a low groan. Pung. Very soon there was the sound of knocking on the door. That was Hunyo hearing his cries of pain and running over to check on his movements. I'm fine, Ling Han said through gritted teeth. Pung, but this was obviously useless against Hunyo. The little girl's violent nature was already activated, and she barged in headfirst. After rolling on the ground, she looked at Ling Han stupidly. Seeing that he could still sit cross-legged and was only sweating profusely, she instantly grinned. What a heartless girl. Ling Han temporarily had no time to pay attention to her. The indestructible heaven scroll continued to circulate, absorbing the medicinal power and remodeling his bones. The sharp pain was like a tsunami, one after another, hitting him so hard that he almost fainted. But if he fainted, he would no longer be able to circulate the indestructible heaven scroll. The medicinal power could only circulate according to his body's instincts, and the effects would naturally be greatly reduced. More importantly, he wanted to take this opportunity to raise his physique to the rock cliff tier. Then he had to circulate the indestructible heaven scroll and absorb the medicinal power according to the secret arts of the heaven scroll. I'll endure it. Ling Han gritted his teeth, the veins on his face and neck bulging. Very soon, a puddle of water appeared where he sat, and his whole body looked as if it had been fished out of the water. Even his eyes were a little dazed. He had taken the same godly medicine, but why was the difference between the two times so great? Ling Han's imagination ran wild to distract himself from the pain. He thought of his father in Grey Cloud Town, thought of Lu Yutong and Li Xichan, and even thought of his last life. After an unknown amount of time, that intense pain finally began to fade, and then completely disappeared. Ling Han breathed a long sigh of relief. Previously he had even thought of giving up, but thankfully he finally persevered. On his body, impurities were expelled this time, but they weren't black impurities but white ones. These were the impurities in his bones. Cutting hair and washing marrow, true to its name. The first portion of godly medicine improved the flesh, the second portion tempered the bones, then what about the third portion? Ling Han breathed a long sigh of relief, and took out the third portion of godly medicine. Xiang. Hunyao immediately pounced over, her eyes fixed on the godly medicine, her saliva almost dripping out. Little girl, you haven't cultivated yet, so it's too much of a waste for you to eat. Moreover, the medicinal effect is too strong, and will make you bloated, Ling Han said with a smile. Eat. Hunyao grabbed Ling Han's hand and started shaking it, looking like a spoiled child. No. Ling Han shook his head decisively. There was no use in pretending to be pitiful. Hunyao stuck out her little head, and with a forceful struggle, she bit at the godly medicine. Her strength was ridiculously strong, and with a moment of inattention from Ling Han, she actually broke free, and bit the godly medicine in one bite. Oh no! Bitten by this glutton, there definitely wouldn't be any residue left. As expected, he immediately felt a little tongue licking his hand. It was Hunyao who hadn't had enough, and was gnawing on his hand like a chicken's foot. This spendthrift, Ling Han sighed. Godly medicine, he only got 3 portions in total, and one was wasted by this little girl. Hunyao turned around and gave him a big smile, making Ling Han want to get angry, but he didn't know where to start. Who asked him to scream so miserably just now, alarming this little girl? Speaking of which, the little girl only barged in because she was worried about him. You've lucked out. Hopefully, you'll be able to endure this kind of medicinal effect. Ling Han sighed and carried the little girl out. He had to quickly take a bath. His entire body was covered in filth, and even he felt uncomfortable just by smelling it. After taking a bath, Ling Han looked inside his body, and still revealed a satisfied smile. This time his physique had greatly improved. Although he still hadn't reached the rock cliff tier, his bones were as hard as iron, and his skin had become more resilient, so he shouldn't be far from the rock cliff tier. Most importantly, his life force had greatly improved, and he felt full of energy. He was full of vigor, and would be full of energy to do anything. The next morning, Ling Han faintly felt that something was wrong. After thinking carefully, he finally realized that Hunyao actually hadn't woken up yet. Usually this little girl would be clinging to him and shouting meat, meat, meat. Chapter 137. A glutton actually forgot to eat. The sun must have risen from the west. Ling Han thought that the little girl was definitely not normal, and that something must have happened to her. She had eaten a portion of godly medicine yesterday, and with her cultivation level of body refining tier, eating such a tonic would definitely cause her to overdo it. Ling Han ran to the little girl's room. Originally, she slept at Ling Han's feet, but Lu Yutong thought that no matter how small a girl was, she was still a girl, so she prepared a room for her. He entered the room, swept his eyes around, and was instantly shocked, because he couldn't see the little girl's figure at all, and instead, there was an egg on the bed. That's right, it was an egg, and it was extraordinarily large, as thick as a person's arms and as tall as half a person's height. The body of the egg was snow white, but there were golden patterns that covered the entire body of the egg. Ling Han was dumbfounded. Even if the little girl had a huge transformation and turned into a beautiful fairy in the prime of her youth, then he could accept it after being shocked for a while. But a living person actually turned into an egg. What did that mean? He had no doubt that Hunyao was inside the egg, because the array he set up didn't move at all. Obviously, no one entered or left. Hunyao's origins were very strange. She could increase her cultivation level by eating large amounts of food, which was extremely shocking. Thus, although the power of the godly medicine was endless, It wasn't impossible for the little girl to refine it. This was also the reason why Ling Han wasn't too worried yesterday. But an old hen turning into a duck, and a little girl turning into an egg, this was very strange. Ling Han walked to the egg and first observed it, but couldn't find any clues. He reached out and pressed his hand on the eggshell, but discovered that the eggshell was actually very hot, as if it was about to burn. This was really possible. He moved the egg and placed it on the ground to avoid the bedding from burning and burning the whole courtyard. What was this little girl's origin? Ling Han became more and more curious. In his previous life, he stood at the peak of martial art and entered many historical sites. It could be said that he knew a lot about special constitutions, but he had never heard of any race that could rely on eating to increase their cultivation. Furthermore, it could even produce an egg. He didn't dare to open the eggshell either. What exactly was Hu Nyo's situation? Although he had never seen her before, he only had to refer to birds to know. Eggs had to be broken by themselves, and if he cracked open the eggshell, that would definitely be pulling up seedlings to help them grow, and would only harm others. He had only been reborn for a short period of time, but he had already encountered so many strange things. Fortunately, his heart was big enough, otherwise he would have been scared to death. Forget it. Seems to be quite peaceful now. The little girl should be fine. Let her continue to incubate. When he said the word incubate, he couldn't help but reveal a strange expression. Every morning, he would wake up and discuss swordsmanship with Mo Gao. A few days ago he couldn't do so outside, but now that he was back, he naturally went to Mo Gao's courtyard. The two of them discussed the sword Dao and verified with each other. Both of them had made great progress. In less than 3 days I should be able to break through. Tomorrow I have to go into seclusion, Mo Gao suddenly said. Ling Han was startled, then clasped his hands and said, "Then congratulations, teacher." This sword maniac was a genius in the first place, but his goal was too high, and he directly set his sights on Sword Heart, which caused him to be unable to advance for more than 10 years. It was like how others only needed to obtain 10 points to level up, but he needed to obtain 1,000 points to directly level up to 100, so naturally he had been stuck at the same level. But after verifying with Ling Han, the door to the sword Dao that had originally only been slightly opened was completely open to him, and he suddenly obtained a huge improvement. As the saying went, thick accumulation leads to thin release, allowing him to instantly obtain the comprehension needed for a breakthrough. Ling Han didn't feel it was strange at all. Compared to the difficulty of forming Sword Heart, Gushing Spring Tear was really nothing. This sword maniac was already on the right track. At least before the spiritual infant tear, he wouldn't encounter any bottlenecks in his cultivation. He could completely use that sliver of Sword Heart to cut through them, and his achievements would be limitless. Ling Han was also happy for him, and secretly decided that when this teacher cultivated to the spiritual pedestal tier, he would choose a cultivation technique to gift to him. Because basically all the cultivation techniques in Rain Country only had 5 layers, unable to pry into the mysteries of the Flower Blossom tier, or else the 8 great clans would have at least 1 or 2 geniuses who broke through to the Flower Blossom tier, right? He just didn't know what opportunity the Qi family had that allowed a Flower Blossom tier elite to appear and keep watch over the mountains and rivers. It wouldn't be the power of the nation, right? Ling Han had never been an emperor, so he wasn't familiar with it, but thinking that only the imperial family of the 9 nations of the desolate north had a Flower Blossom tier elite keeping watch, it should have something to do with the position of the country. Before this, Ling Han only knew that using the power of the nation could increase battle prowess. For example, Qi Yongyi was the son of a king, so he could only use the power of a city, but the Son of Heaven Fist technique was still extremely powerful. If the ruler of a nation used the Son of Heaven Fist technique and used the power of the nation, the power would definitely be stronger. But could the power of the nation also increase cultivation, break through to the Flower Blossom tier, and complete the step of leaping out of mortality? Ling Han shook his head. Who cared? It wasn't like he had to worry about cultivation techniques anyway. When he left Mo Gao's place, it was already noon. Ling Han couldn't be bothered to cook by himself, so he left the academy and went to a restaurant to have a meal. He had only been in the imperial city for a few days, so every time he went to a different restaurant, he would try out which one had the best food. However, he was obviously a person who had a troublesome aura activated. He had just finished ordering his food and was waiting when he saw a group of 4 people come upstairs. It was mealtime and the business of this restaurant was quite good. At this moment there were no empty seats left, so the 4 people stood at the foot of the stairs, scanning the place with their eyes, as if trying to find an empty table. A waiter had already walked up to them and was explaining something to the 4 people. But after a short while, he ran over to Ling Han's side and said, "Customer, could you give up your seat?" Ling Han frowned and said, "Why should I give up my seat?" "Customer, could it be that you don't recognize the 4 of them? They are young Master Kong and his friends, so you can't afford to offend them. I am only doing this for your sake." The waiter looked at Ling Han with a surprised expression, as if surprised that Ling Han didn't recognize this young Master Kong. "I don't know him and I don't intend to." Ling Han shook his head. "Hurry up and serve the dishes. Maybe I'll leave after eating for an hour or so, and there will naturally be a seat." "An hour or so?" The waiter smiled bitterly. If he had to wait for an hour or so, young Master Kong would probably tear down their restaurant. But first come, first served. This was the most basic rule. If the restaurant couldn't even guarantee this, who would come to eat in the future? He could only brace himself and go see that young Master Kong. After a while, he saw young Master Kong and his friends walk over together. "Pauper, take this 100 silver coins and get lost," young Master Kong said, his face full of disdain. Chapter 138. There was a banknote on the table, and it was indeed a banknote worth 100 taels of silver. Ling Han smiled slightly. Since someone was giving him money, he naturally wouldn't reject it. He said, "Waiter, did you hear that? Someone's treating me to this meal. Hurry up and serve up the good wine and dishes." Fuck. Young Master Kong was furious. This brat had taken his money and still hadn't scrammed? He pressed his right hand on the table and threatened, "Pauper, if you don't want to get beaten up, then scram." In the imperial capital, even a hedonistic young master like him wouldn't dare to publicly threaten someone's life in front of so many people. Ling Han looked around and said, "Where did that dog bark come from? Woof woof woof. It's so annoying." Someone at the side laughed out loud. The laughter was crisp and had an indescribable allure to it, causing many people to turn their heads over. It was a beautiful woman about 23 or 24 years old. Her black hair cascaded down like a waterfall, and her facial features were distinct as if they had been carved out with a knife. She was full of charm. Because she was sitting, it was impossible to see her figure clearly. However, as long as she was large enough to block the line of sight when she lowered her head, it was obvious how impressive her figure was. For a moment, everyone was stunned. What was even more strange was that they had only just discovered such a beauty after sitting here for so long. However, they quickly discovered why. This was because there was a light veil on the side of the beauty's table. She had probably covered her face when she came in and only took it off when she was eating. Therefore, not many people noticed it. Furthermore, this beauty wasn't alone. There were 3 black-robed men accompanying her at the same table. Their faces were expressionless, but they were obviously bodyguards. Because only the beauty was holding the chopsticks, the 3 of them were sitting upright and still. They didn't stand behind the beauty because they didn't want to attract attention. Although their black uniforms and cold expressions were enough to attract attention, young Master Kong was also stunned. He couldn't help but reveal an expression of infatuation. He asked the beauty, "Mainyo, what's your name?" Before the beauty could reply, one of the black-robed men waved his hand at young Master Kong as if he was shooing away a fly. The young master of the Kong clan felt like he was going crazy. Earlier, a youth had already looked down on him, and now, he was being driven away by a wave of his hand. What was going on? Could it be that after a night, the imperial capital was no longer the imperial capital that he knew? How brazen! How dare you be so impudent in front of young Master Kong? One of the young Master Kong's friends rushed over and rebuked the black-robed man. The black-robed man's expression didn't change. He just took out a golden token from his bosom and made a driving gesture again. All the tokens are useless. Our Kong family is lacking a few. That scoundrel friend was just about to brag for young Master Kong, but he was unexpectedly slapped hard in the face. He looked at young Master Kong in disbelief, because that slap was from young Master Kong. If you want to die, don't drag me down with you. Young Master Kong cursed murderously. Then he turned to the black-robed man and his expression immediately became incomparably respectful. My lord, Kong Wenhui has eyes but cannot see. Please forgive me, my lord. Hiss. Everyone in the inn was shocked. Had young Master Kong been possessed? Not only had he slapped his follower, but he had also taken the initiative to apologize. There was only one possibility. This person's background was far greater than the Kong clan, and young Master Kong could only obediently lower his head. The black-robed man still didn't say anything. He waved his hand a third time. This time young Master Kong didn't dare to disobey. He fled with his tail between his legs, not even taking back the 100 silver taels banknote. He had already been scared out of his wits. Everyone couldn't help but look at that token. Just what kind of status did it represent to be able to scare away young Master Kong? Ah, I remember now, one of the guests exclaimed, but he immediately covered his mouth with both hands, revealing a terrified expression. Hey, tell me quietly. Just what is the origin of that token? That's right, speak. The guest from before walked over. Seeing that the three black-robed men didn't react at all, as if they didn't care at all, he gathered his courage and said, Imperial Guards, Black Cloud Army. All of a sudden, the inn was completely silent. The three words Black Cloud Army seemed to possess some sort of magical power, causing everyone to tremble in fear. The truth was so. The Black Cloud Army was the Imperial Guards of the Imperial family, and it was also the most elite troop. Every member of the army was an elite. More importantly, they had the special right to kill. In the Imperial City, even the spiritual pedestal tier elites of the 8 great clans couldn't kill as they pleased. As the saying went, every family had its rules and every country had its laws. But the Black Cloud Army could, as long as they thought that the other party had the possibility of threatening the safety of the Imperial family. Thus, even someone as arrogant as young Master Kong could only immediately flee. Otherwise, even if he was killed, he would have died in vain. Everyone became even more curious. Just what was the identity of this incredibly beautiful woman that could make 3 Black Cloud Army follow and protect her? She was beautiful and voluptuous, and was so ripe that it was almost dripping water. She definitely had been in contact with rain and dew before, so she definitely couldn't be a princess. Could she be the current imperial concubine? When they thought of this, everyone hurriedly retracted their gazes. This was the current emperor's woman, and if they took another look at her, they might have their eyes gouged out. But why would the Rain Emperor's woman run out of the imperial palace? Ling Han's eyes swept over the 3 members of the Black Cloud Army and the beautiful woman, and he was slightly surprised, because the 3 members of the Black Cloud Army were only in Gushing Spring tier, but the beautiful woman was actually in Spiritual Ocean tier. A Spiritual Ocean tier cultivator in her early 20s was too much, wasn't it? This woman should have taken some kind of medicine to preserve her beauty, and her real age should be at least 27 or 28. Otherwise, she shouldn't be a citizen of Rain Country, and should have come from some great sect, which wouldn't be strange at all. One after another, people paid their bills and left. Just the thought of being in the same room as 3 members of the Black Cloud Army, who had the special right to kill, was enough to make their hair stand on end, and they lost all their appetite. Ling Han's dishes were also served, and he began to eat without a care in the world. A burst of instrumental music was suddenly heard, and then the sound of footsteps could be heard coming up the stairs. Very soon they arrived at the 2nd floor, and 2 people, one old and one young, appeared. The old man's figure was stooped, and he had a goatee. In his hand he held a huqin. The other person was a young girl. She was dressed in coarse linen clothing, but it was unable to conceal her alluring figure. Her face was bare, yet she looked fresh and alluring and extremely beautiful. She was only slightly inferior to Lu Yutong and Li Sichuan Jia. After the old man found a place to sit down, he began to play the huqin, and the young girl also began to sing along. Her voice was mellow and melodious, and it was so beautiful that one could not help but be intoxicated by it. Even though the 3 members of the Black Cloud Army were serious in speech and manner, when they heard the young girl's voice that sounded like the sounds of nature, they still looked tempted, and their eyes became slightly dazed. Yet Ling Han sighed. It seemed like he wouldn't be able to enjoy his meal anymore. He could feel the killing intent. Chapter 139. Annihilate one more Sun clan? The eldest imperial prince could not help but glance at Ling Han. Though he held Ling Han in high regard, even if Ling Han had all the alchemists of Rain Country standing behind him, it would still be impossible for him to annihilate the Sun clan, because the 8 great clans were all pillars of the country. If it really came to that, not only would the Rain Emperor make a move, even that ancestor who had been in hiding all this while would jump out. But Ling Han's expression was calm to the point of indifference. These words did not seem to be words that he had said in a moment of excitement. The deep look in his eyes even caused a chill to rise up in the eldest imperial prince's heart. How could this be? He was in the 9th layer of Gushing Spring tier, and already had 1 foot in the spiritual ocean tier. Moreover, he was the eldest imperial prince of the empire, and yet he was actually frightened by the look in a young man's eyes? I hope you are not so stupid. Sun Ziyan did not hear Ling Han's soft murmur. He flicked his sleeves, appearing to be extremely displeased. Of course. He had thought that with him stepping forward, it would be a simple matter for him to mediate the enmity between Ling Han and Chen Yunxiang, but he had never imagined that Ling Han would actually not give him any face at all. The eldest imperial prince did not try to persuade him any further. Ling Han's words just now were obviously deliberately meant for him to hear. If he continued to try to persuade him, would Ling Han say something even more shocking, and still want to annihilate one more Sun clan? That would really be treason and heresy. Sun Ziyan turned around and left. When he arrived at the main entrance of the Spirit Treasures Pavilion, he saw an old man coming up to greet him. He asked Ziyan, what did that brat say? It was Chen Yunxiang. A sliver of displeasure appeared on Sun Ziyan's face. Though he did not care about the lives of a few lowly commoners, this old man actually had that kind of hobby, which still made him feel extremely disgusted. But who asked him to be his father-in-law? He refused to give up. He shook his head. Chen Yunxiang was shocked at first, and then immediately said angrily, "This brat is relying on the fact that he has the protection of a noble daughter of the Chan clan, and actually does not even give face to you, Ziyan." Sun Ziyan humphed. He naturally knew that Chen Yunxiang was trying to sow discord, but he was indeed very displeased. The eldest imperial prince and the 3rd imperial prince both seemed to be on good terms with this brat. It's not as simple as him sponging off a woman. What? Chen Yunxiang instantly broke out in a cold sweat. The Chen clan was only a small clan, and if they really provoked the likes of the eldest imperial prince or the 3rd imperial prince, then they would be able to destroy the Chen clan in a matter of minutes. What are you afraid of? Sun Ziyan asked coldly. With Ziyan blocking for me, of course I have nothing to fear, Chen Yunxiang hurriedly said in a flattering tone. Chen Yunxiang hurriedly flattered him. Although he was the old man's father-in-law, the two of them could not be mentioned in the same breath. Sun Ziyan finally humphed, and turned around to look at Ling Han and the others who were ascending the stairs, a cold smirk curling up the corners of his lips. Greetings, eldest imperial prince. The guards at the entrance of the Spirit Treasures Pavilion were naturally quick-witted people, and when they saw the eldest imperial prince and the others approaching, they hurriedly bowed in greeting. A young manager immediately came out to welcome them, and said, "Eldest imperial prince, young masters, and noble ladies have graced our pavilion with your presence. Your presence brings light to our humble abode. Please come in." Under the guidance of that young manager, they walked up the stairs. The 2nd and 3rd floors were all private rooms, but there were only a mere 20 private rooms on the 3rd floor. Those were reserved for the current Rain Emperor, the clan heads of the 8 great clans, the 2 headmasters of Huyang Academy, the pavilion master of the Heavens Medicine Pavilion, and other super important figures. As for the others, even the eldest imperial prince and the 3rd imperial prince, they could only get a private room on the 2nd floor. Thus, when they reached the 2nd floor, they naturally had to turn. "Esteemed guests, your private room is on the 3rd floor," that young manager said in a very strange tone. Everyone stopped in their tracks. How could it be on the 3rd floor? If there was anyone among them who had the noblest status, then it would definitely be the eldest imperial prince. But even the eldest imperial prince did not have the right to ascend to the 3rd floor, unless he ascended to the throne and became the ruler of the world. "Young Master Han is the most esteemed guest of our pavilion," So of course he has the right to ascend to the third floor, the young manager said as he bowed respectfully towards Ling Han. What? Everyone was stunned. How could this be possible? This brat was only 16 or 17 years old, and was in the 9th layer of element gathering tier. What right did he have to ascend to a private room on the 3rd floor, and stand side by side with the clan heads of the 8 great clans, the 2 headmasters, the big boss of alchemy, and even the current reign emperor? Ling Han glanced at the young manager, and the latter gave him a friendly smile. He knew that the Spirit Treasures Pavilion, in order to confirm the origins of the foundation building pill, must have gone to the Heaven's Medicine Pavilion to make some inquiries, and also found out that this pill was concocted by Ling Han. This was a foundation building pill, an alchemical pill that was close to Earth grade. This meant that Ling Han was not only a black grade high-level alchemist, he would also basically be an Earth grade alchemist in the future. This kind of person was still not qualified to ascend to the 3rd floor. Haha, thanks to young Master Han, I can also go to the 3rd floor to have a seat, the eldest imperial prince said with a loud laugh, but there was a sliver of confusion and jealousy in his eyes, and even more so shock. The Spirit Treasures Pavilion was a business, so how could they act recklessly? Since they had given Ling Han a private room on the 3rd floor, it meant that Ling Han had the corresponding power, or perhaps background. This shocked him. What right did Ling Han have to stand side by side with the patriarchs of the 8 great clans and the big bosses of alchemy? Sun Ziyan's expression instantly darkened. Previously, he had looked down on Ling Han, thinking that he was someone who lived off a woman, and had somehow managed to latch onto the thighs of the eldest and 3rd imperial princes. But from the looks of it now, it was obvious that he had been wrong. Even the eldest imperial prince did not have the right to ascend to a private room on the 3rd floor. What more to get one for Ling Han? Even he was like this, so Chun Yunxiang was even more shocked. He was so scared that his face had turned pale, and he secretly regretted why he was so unlucky to actually bump into Ling Han, this bringer of misfortune. Watching Ling Han ascend step by step, Sun Ziyan revealed a complicated expression. Was he still going to continue to be a dark horse and oppose Ling Han? Obviously, Ling Han's background could possibly be shockingly powerful. When he glanced at Chan Yunxiang again, he could not help but think of that seductive and alluring concubine of his, and his gaze became firm. He was definitely going to interfere in this matter, not only for the sake of that concubine of his, but also for the sake of his own reputation. As the young master of the Sun clan, no one should think of stepping on him. There were only a mere 20 private rooms on the 3rd floor, but each private room was incredibly spacious, and could accommodate a few dozen people. Moreover, there were beautiful female attendants accompanying them, serving food and water, and were extremely attentive. Ling Han and the others all sat down. Hu Niu, on the other hand, knelt on Ling Han's lap with a serious expression, her small body straightened up. Young Master Han, is this your sister? The eldest imperial prince asked with a smile. You can say so, Ling Han said with a smile, and affectionately rubbed Hu Niu's head. The little girl immediately showed a satisfied expression, and like a little kitten, she rubbed her head against Ling Han's chest. The eldest imperial prince looked closely at Hu Niu for a while, and could not help but look shocked. He pointed at Hu Niu in shock and said, she's actually an element gathering tier. This little girl was only 5 or 6 years old, but shockingly, she was already an element gathering tier. This was practically terrifying. Hu Niu glared at the eldest imperial prince in dissatisfaction. Ling Han hated being pointed at by others, and she had been most affected by Ling Han, so she naturally felt the same way. Her small mouth opened wide, revealing her little white teeth, and she had the urge to bite someone. Niu, be good, Ling Han said with a smile. Hu Niu instantly withdrew her fierce expression, and smiled sweetly. Yet the eldest imperial prince was still in shock. How could there be such a young martial artist in element gathering tier in this world? This was too unreal. Indeed, birds of a feather flocked together. Ling Han was a monster, and the people around him were also monsters. Chapter 140. This young girl was actually one of the assassins in the restaurant. Ling Han's expression was strange. This was too much of a coincidence. This young girl actually hid at his place. But thinking about it, Huyang University was indeed a good place to hide from pursuers, and this place was the most remote corner of Huyang University. It wasn't a coincidence that this pair of assassins chose this place. He smiled faintly and said, I don't like it when people point their swords at me. Hung, you have to like it now even if you don't like it, the young girl said a bit innocently, not showing the slightest bit of an assassin's temperament. Ling Han stretched out his finger and pressed it against the tip of the sword, and said, You just used mutual acceptance, do you still have 1% of your battle prowess now? His physique had already surpassed Dead Tree tier, advancing toward Stone Cliff tier. Even if he didn't circulate his origin power to defend himself, the tip of the sword couldn't hurt his finger. He flicked his finger, and the blade instantly swept to the side. Much better now. He cracked a smile. The young girl couldn't help but look shocked, and said, How did you know we used mutual acceptance? This isn't some amazing secret technique. Ling Han shook his head. He didn't have any brothers or sisters in his last life, so when he obtained this secret technique, he only briefly studied it and threw it to the side. He only knew the use and weakness of this secret technique, but couldn't remember the specifics. Hung, even if I only have 1% of my power, it's more than enough to deal with you, a 6th layer poly, the young girl said, unconvinced, and pointed the tip of the sword back. Ling Han laughed and said, If you don't listen, you'll get a spanking. The pervert young girl's pretty face instantly flushed red, and she suddenly raised her sword to attack Ling Han. If this girl's battle prowess hadn't dropped, then Ling Han really wouldn't dare to take the attack head-on. After all, the 7th layer of Gushing Spring tier was much stronger than him, but her current battle prowess wasn't even 1,000th, much less 1%. He was also a freak, and his battle prowess could rival the 1st layer of Gushing Spring tier. As time went by, he gained the upper hand. Pung pung pung. With just a few punches, Ling Han had knocked the long sword out of the girl's hand. With a clang, the tip of the sword was inserted into the soil, and the body of the sword swayed. Must I spank you before you'll be honest? Ling Han purposely put on a stern face. The young girl was so scared that her face turned pale. Why was she so unlucky? Not only did she fail her first mission, but she had also just left the wolf's den and entered the tiger's den. Shio! Another figure flew out. It was the old assassin. As he waved his hands, the strings of his zither danced. Like heavenly silk they wrapped around Ling Han. Old man, although I respect the elderly, if you want to take advantage of your seniority, I won't be polite either, Ling Han said as he waved his fists to block. With the support of his strong physique, the zither strings that could cut through metal could not do anything to his fists. The young girl also raised her sword to meet the attack. The two of them cooperated very well, and when they worked together, their battle prowess increased not just by 1, but by 2 or 3 times. But their power had dropped, and adding on the fact that their opponent was a monster like Ling Han, it was useless even if they worked together. They were suppressed to the point where they had no ability to retaliate. They couldn't help being shocked. Even if their power had dropped, their combined power was enough to suppress any 9th level poly expert. But this youth in front of them was practically a monster, and he was actually suppressing them instead. If you don't listen, then you'll get a beating. Ling Han's foot flew out, landing on the young girl's but in sending her flying. Then he punched out, hitting the old man's chest and sending him flying as well. However, after this punch was delivered, Ling Han's expression was strange. That didn't feel right. He walked over to the old man, who had already fallen to the ground and was in so much pain that he could only groan. Ling Han groped around the old man's face for a while, and then suddenly tore off a thin mask. The old man's appearance immediately changed, revealing a beautiful face that was at least 70% similar to the young girl's. No wonder. Ling Han suddenly understood. He had been wondering why this pair of brother and sister had such a big age difference, but it turned out that this brother wasn't actually the older brother, but the older sister who had disguised herself as an old man. Pervert! The older sister shouted angrily with a red face, and then fainted from anger. Ling Han sighed. He hadn't done it on purpose. Who told this girl to disguise herself as an old man? Older sister. After the disguise was exposed, the young girl stopped hiding and immediately called out. But she had been kicked by Ling Han very heavily, and now her butt was numb and numb. She had just gotten up when she sat back down. How troublesome. Ling Han sighed again. Don't you have any other places to hide? Why did you have to come here and cause trouble for me? The young girl revealed a wronged expression. If they had known that there was a pervert living here, they wouldn't have come here even if they were beaten to death. Hey, it's not right to curse people in your heart, said Ling Han. How did you know? The young girl was surprised and her expression was cute. How can you be an assassin with that kind of personality? Ling Han only felt that the master of this pair of sisters was too much of a failure. How could he train such an assassin? He could practically find a piece of tofu to commit suicide. None of your business. The young girl snorted and ignored him. Be careful or I'll spank your butt. Ling Han threatened. You dare. The young girl was so scared that her face turned pale again. Usually the older sister would shelter her from the wind and rain. Now that the older sister had fainted, she suddenly felt at a loss. You only know how to make trouble for me. Ling Han shook his head and reached out to grab the older sister's collar. He then walked over to grab the younger sister and walked into the house. What do you want to do? The younger sister was so scared that her pretty face turned pale. Was this guy going to do something lewd in broad daylight? What do you think? Ling Han deliberately said fiercely. The younger sister was so scared that her eyes widened, and she actually fainted as well. Sai, I really have to give it to you. You can also be an assassin like this. Ling Han shook his head. At first, the two girls cooperated well with each other, their movements practiced, as if they were experienced assassins, but in the end they were just rookies. He threw the two girls into Hunyo's room. After thinking for a moment, he moved Hunyo's egg into his own room. He didn't know when the little girl would hatch. After a while, the pair of sisters woke up. When they found that their clothes were intact and there was nothing strange, they were slightly relieved. Sister, while that guy isn't here, let's quickly escape, the younger sister said. How? The older sister smiled bitterly. After we used the two hearts as one, we forcefully attacked. Can you still use origin power now? If we go out now and fall into the hands of those stinky men, I'd rather die. But that guy is so bad. He keeps saying he's going to spank my butt, the younger sister said, feeling wronged. My eyes are clear and he doesn't seem like that kind of person. The older sister shook her head. Sister, don't forget. He just touched your chest. The younger sister pointed out a fact. Damn girl, nonsense. I was punched by him. The older sister hurriedly explained. What's the difference? The younger sister muttered. Ling Han just happened to push open the door and enter, and his face twitched involuntarily. This pair of sisters were even more noobs than he had imagined. Chapter 141. When Ling Han walked in, the two sisters both revealed wary expressions. Previously, they had still been able to put up a fight, but now they were like fish on a chopping board waiting to be slaughtered. Ling Han moved a stool over and sat down, saying, Tell me about your origins. The two girls shook their heads at the same time, and the younger sister still stubbornly said, A warrior can be killed but not humiliated. Just kill us. Fine, since you want to die so badly, I'll fulfill your wish. Ling Han nodded and stood up. The two sisters still had the spirit of facing death calmly, waiting for their deaths, but their tightly clenched hands betrayed them. Facing death, who could not be fearless? Ling Han rubbed his chin and said, Seeing that you two look quite good, it seems too wasteful to just kill you like this. How can you not keep your word? The younger sister angrily rebuked. Hurry up and kill us. Ling Han could not help but laugh and said, So what if I don't keep my word? You won't have a good ending, the younger sister said with a pale face. Ling Han laughed loudly and said to the older sister, Bringing along such a silly girl must be very stressful, right? You're still scolding me? The younger sister felt extremely wronged. This youth was either scolding her or scaring her. He was really too despicable. Furthermore, he was not even as old as she was, yet he kept calling her a little girl, pretending to be mature. Tell me your names first or I'll spank your buttocks, Ling Han threatened. Humph, I won't tell you, the younger sister said stubbornly. I'm Lu Feng Air and she's my younger sister Lu Ru Air, the older sister said. Sister, why did you tell him that we'd rather die than submit? The younger sister Lu Ru Air said with a pout. What about the person you want to kill? Ling Han asked again. She's called Suku Xian. and she used to be a member of our Falling Flower Palace, but now she's our enemy. This time Lu Ru'er rushed to answer. Since she could no longer rather die than submit, someone like her who spoke too quickly would not be able to keep a secret. Why? Ling Han asked again. He felt that he was really too curious and this was actually none of his business. Suku Xian used to be our Falling Flower Palace's #1 assassin, but she actually colluded with outsiders, killed her way into our Falling Flower Palace, and almost killed everyone in our Falling Flower Palace. Although we are the only ones left in the Falling Flower Palace, we will definitely make this traitor pay with his life, Lu Ru'er said with her head held high, looking very impassioned. Pa! Ling Han hit her with a wooden plank. The girl immediately held her head in pain and stared at him with eyes full of bitterness and hatred. Why don't you say it? Ling Han said to his sister. We come from the Fire Nation. The Falling Flower Palace is an assassin organization. We sisters were accepted as disciples by the Grand Elder of the Falling Flower Palace when we were young. Suku Xian colluded with the Fire Nation's royal family and slaughtered almost everyone in the Falling Flower Palace. Elder Hua managed to escape with us sisters, but she was also heavily injured. After holding on for a few years, she died last year. Lu Feng'er said. She spoke clearly, unlike her sister, who was jumpy and didn't care if others could understand. And Suku Xian's motive for doing this was only to obtain an appearance-retaining pill from the Falling Flower Palace. After she obtained it, she came to Rain Country and used some unknown method to become the mistress of the Rain Emperor, and was given the title of concubine Yun. We used the keepsake she left behind to lure her out, but we didn't think that in a short 5 years, this woman actually broke through to the spiritual ocean tier, causing all our efforts to go to waste. Ling Han was shocked. For the sake of an appearance-retaining pill, she actually turned hostile and mercilessly, destroying the sect that had raised her. But when he thought about it again, some women loved beauty as much as their lives. For them to maintain their appearance, they were indeed willing to pay any price. However, this Suku Xian indeed had some tricks up her sleeves. She actually managed to wash her face clean and became the concubine of Rain Country. You two can stay here to recover from your injuries. Once you've recovered, leave immediately. Don't drag me down with you, he said. Lu Ru'er's face was filled with shock, and she asked, why are you helping us? Ling Han laughed and deliberately said, of course it's because you two are beautiful, and I'll wait for you two to repay me with your bodies. Hung, I'm not going to sleep with you. Lu Ru'er immediately said proudly. Silly girl. Ling Han shook his head. After understanding the situation, he naturally lost interest in continuing the conversation and turned to leave the room. He was willing to save them mainly because he was displeased with Suku Xian. That woman actually wanted to kill him, so he naturally had to fight back. Although there were 2 more mouths compared to Hunyo's appetite, there was really no difference whether there were more or not between the 2 sisters. In terms of food consumption, it would not arouse any suspicions. In the blink of an eye, 2 days passed. Ling Han took alchemical pills every day, and his cultivation improved very quickly. However, there was poison in medicine. Although he concocted a large amount of alchemical pills, he could only take 1 or 2 pills every day. Otherwise, if the medicinal poison accumulated, the consequences would be unthinkable. The recovery rate of the Lu sisters was very slow. Using heart and soul as one to stimulate their potential injured their origin, and medicinal pills were basically useless against injuries to the origin. Even if they were useful, they would at least be earth grade and above spiritual medicine. Ling Han was not generous enough to get them for the sisters. There was some change in the egg that Hunyo had transformed into. Its color changed from white to red, and one could faintly see a crimson glow flickering inside, as if this little girl was about to hatch. The people who had gone to the ancient battlefield also returned. The godly medicine had run away, and the spiritual tool had flown away. What should be obtained had naturally been obtained, and what could not be obtained naturally could not be obtained again, so what was the point of staying there? That night, the 3rd Imperial Prince earnestly invited Ling Han to the Cherishing Flower Pavilion for a gathering. Ling Han had a good impression of this Imperial Prince, so he decided to give him some face and attend the banquet. The Cherishing Flower Pavilion was the most extravagant money-squandering establishment in the imperial city. Anyone with a bit of status would choose to receive guests here. because not only was there precious food and intoxicating wine, there were also strictly trained female attendants who were as beautiful as flowers and had a myriad of manners. It could be said that with their manners and appearance, they could completely pass off as the noble ladies of the various great clans. This naturally increased the curiosity of men, and they flocked to this place like ducks. However, the threshold to enter the Cherishing Flower Pavilion was too high. Even members of small clans did not have the right to enter this place. Even if they wanted to gift them money, they would not accept it. But the more it was so, the more business in the Cherishing Flower Pavilion flourished. One could not help but sigh in admiration at the master of this place's control over people's hearts. The third imperial prince had not only invited Ling Han, but had also invited many other young geniuses. He had reserved a side courtyard in the Cherishing Flower Pavilion, and could be said to be extremely extravagant. Merely the cost of this one night would be enough for a normal person to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. Ling Han walked leisurely, and arrived in front of the Cherishing Flower Pavilion. At the entrance, there were two female attendants who were as beautiful as flowers and jade welcoming guests. Their figures were slender, and their quality was considerably high. Big brother Ling." A voice filled with surprise suddenly sounded from behind him. Ling Han turned around, and saw a young man and woman standing side by side. He could not help but smile and said, "Li Hao Shui, it really is you." Li Hao and Zhu Shui both smiled, and hurriedly walked up to greet him. "Hey, should I congratulate you for getting your hands on the beauties?" Ling Han cupped Li Hao's hand, causing the guy to instantly look embarrassed, yet he could not conceal the joy on his face. Chapter 142. Ling Han only needed to think about it for a moment to guess the crux of the matter. Li Hao had entered Huyang University, and would definitely have a bright future. The Zhu family was worried that Li Hao would have a change of heart after experiencing the extravagant lifestyle in the capital, so they had Zhu Shui follow him. However, it seemed that this couple had already broken through that layer of window paper, and their relationship had already formed. Ling Han nodded inwardly, feeling happy for them. "Brother Ling, I've been looking for you ever since I entered the institute, but I haven't been able to find you," Li Hao said somewhat guiltily. Ling Han laughed loudly and teased, "You probably haven't spent much time with Shui. That's why you haven't been able to find me, right?" Li Hao immediately blushed. He and Zhu Shui had only had a hazy feeling before, and neither of them had pointed it out. After arriving in the capital, they had been a single man and a single woman, and they had also left their homes, so their feelings had naturally grown. "Brother Ling, you only know how to tease people," Zhu Shui said coquettishly, helping Li Hao resolve the awkwardness. Ling Han smiled slightly. Li Hao was a bit wooden, while Zhu Shui was much more flexible. The two of them complemented each other perfectly. Pauper?" At this moment, a soft voice rang out from behind them, and a young man quickly walked over. It was actually the Kong family's eldest young master. When he arrived at Ling Han, he couldn't help but sneer. "What a coincidence to actually run into you here." He had been swindled out of 100 taels of silver by Ling Han. This bit of money was naturally nothing to him, but he was extremely displeased. It was just that Suku Xian had interfered, and he hadn't had the time to settle the score with Ling Han. "Young Master Kong, who is this fellow?" A gorgeously dressed woman came over and leaned into the Kong family's eldest young master's embrace. "Oh, just a pauper." The Kong family's eldest young master waved his hand disdainfully. "Who are you calling a pauper?" Li Hao was young and impetuous, and he couldn't help but retort. The Kong family's eldest young master swept his gaze over Li Hao and Zhu Shui, and immediately revealed a disdainful expression. "You two must have just arrived in the capital. How did you know?" Li Hao blurted out. "Aha, all of you look like country bumpkins. You must have come from some rural corner." The disdain in young Master Kong's eyes deepened. He stared at Zhu Shui and said, "But this country bumpkin is not bad looking. If she dresses up properly, she might have some fun." Bullshit. How could Li Hao allow his lover to be insulted? He immediately punched out at young Master Kong. "Arg!" The beautiful woman immediately screamed, "Stand off to the side." Young Master Kong pushed the seductive woman to the side, then waved his hands in Li Hao's direction. Pung pung pung. The two of them started fighting. Li Hao was at the 4th level of Poly, while the eldest son of the Kong family was at the 5th level of Poly. In theory he should be stronger, but it was obvious that he was piled up with all kinds of resources. His foundation in martial art was not stable at all, and his battle prowess was only at 4 stars. As a result, the two of them fought to a draw. For a moment, the battle was intense, and neither had the upper hand. Ha ha ha, who would have thought that a country bumpkin would have some strength? Young Master Kong laughed. Country bumpkin, how about lending your woman to me for a few days? Don't feel like you're losing out. Under my tutelage, your woman can learn many techniques and let a country bumpkin like you have a taste of something new. Hearing him insult his woman again, Li Hao's eyes turned red. In a rage, he drew his sword and slashed at young Master Kong. You little brat, you dare use a weapon against me? Young Master Kong snorted and also drew his sword, fighting against Li Hao. Li Hao roared and finally used his blade chi, which danced towards young Master Kong like a raging dragon. Young Master Kong had forcibly raised his poly level to the 5th level, so how could he possibly defend against the blade chi? He immediately revealed a panicked expression. In just 2 or 3 moves, his body had already been slashed by the blade chi, causing him to cry out in pain. Stop! Stop! He cried out in alarm, hastily stopping the battle. He was not someone with a firm will. Apologize, shouted Li Hao as he sheathed his saber. The Kong family's eldest young master's face was ashen. He was being asked to apologize to a country bumpkin. If others found out about this, where would his face go? But this country bumpkin was clearly a rash brat. If he were to forcefully resist, he might really suffer a calamity. Just as he was about to lower his head for the time being, his eyes swept over the area, and his face immediately revealed a joyful expression. He said, Big Brother Tan, save me. A tall and slender young man strolled over. He was handsome, and his every movement exuded a strong sense of confidence. His name was Tan Wei Qi, and he was a member of the younger generation of a middle-class family in the imperial capital. In the imperial city, there were only 8 great clans, and they needed a powerful warrior of spiritual pedestal tier to keep watch. There were many more mid-level clans, because they only needed a powerful warrior of spiritual ocean tier to keep watch. At least, there were even more small clans, and only a warrior of gushing spring tier was enough. For example, although the Kong family's young master was respectfully addressed as young master, in reality, he was just from a small family. It was just that the Kong family had been doing business for generations. Although they didn't produce many experts, their family was well off and was even wealthier than many mid-level families. Because of this, young Master Kong knew many young masters from mid-level clans. This was also his capital. At first, Tan Wei Qi did not recognize young Master Kong, because the latter was currently in a very sorry state. He only managed to recognize him after taking a closer look. He could not help but be surprised and said, Kong Wenhui. Big Brother Tan, it's me. Kong Wenhui said with a mournful expression. Why are you in such a sorry state? Tan Wei Qi could not help but laugh, because he discovered that Kong Wenhui's opponent was only at the 4th layer of Poly. Kong Wenhui glared fiercely at Li Hao and said, It's this country bumpkin who actually dares to act so arrogantly in the imperial city just because he has formed a flash of saber chi? Oh! Tan Wei Qi swept his gaze over Li Hao, and could not help but reveal an expression of disdain. He naturally could tell with a single glance that this was an outsider. That kind of country bumpkin aura simply assaulted his senses. As a member of one of the great clans of the imperial city, whether it was Kong Wenhui or Tan Wei Qi, they both had a natural sense of pride, and could not accept people who came from other places. Country bumpkin, kneel down and kowtow in apology. Tan Wei Qi did not ask how the two of them had gotten into a conflict, and immediately ordered Li Hao in a menacing tone. Of course he did not have any misgivings. He was just a country bumpkin, so what kind of background could he have in the imperial city? Li Hao did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. The pressure this person gave him far surpassed that of Kong Wenhui. At the very least, his cultivation base was at the late Poly realm. His saber chi could just barely raise his battle prowess by 1 star, but it definitely could not match up to a 7th layer Poly realm. Unless Tan Wei Qi was also like Kong Wenhui, who only had an empty cultivation base. A trifling 4th layer poly. I can suppress you with a single finger. Tan Weiqi coldly snorted and arrogantly said, I'm at the 9th layer poly realm. Li Hao's expression changed greatly. Even if his opponent was also a fake, a 9th layer poly realm expert should still have 7 stars of battle prowess, and he would still be able to suppress him. Brother Hao, let it go, said Zhu Shui. His opponent was too strong, and with Ling Han's strength, although he did not need to fear 9th layer poly realm experts, this was still the imperial city. Who knew what kind of background each and every one of them had? Chapter 143. The auction ended, and everyone naturally returned to their own homes. Those who had bought an item that caught their fancy were naturally happy, while those who did not could only shake their heads and sigh. Ling Han was the biggest winner today, earning a huge sum of almost 200 million. If word of this got out, there would probably be people who would come to rob him on the way. Just this one haul would be enough to last a lifetime. Fortunately, there were no such people who were blind. When he returned to Huyang Academy, Ling Han slept soundly. In his eyes, a huge sum of 1 or 200 million was not much different from a piece of scrap paper, so there was no need for him to count it like a money grubber. Early the next morning, he naturally woke up to cultivate as usual. His current rate of advancement was too fast. 2 days ago, he had just broken through to the 9th layer of element gathering tier, but now he was already close to the late period of the 9th layer. With just one more step, he would be at the peak period of the 9th layer, and would be able to attempt to break through to Gushing Spring tier. Should I try out that possibility? Ling Han asked in his mind after he had finished cultivating. In his last life, he had entered into a great many ancient sites, and naturally obtained a great deal of cultivation and martial arts techniques, as well as some handwritten notes that he suspected belonged to a powerful warrior of Shattering Void tier. There was one possibility mentioned in those notes. 10th layer of element gathering tier 9 was the extreme number of heaven and earth. So in this world, 9 ruled supreme. The most supreme being of 9 and 5 was the ruler of the mortal world. It was the same for martial arts. Whether it was from body refining tier or heaven tier, 9 layers was the extreme number. And from body refining tier to heaven tier, there were actually 9 tiers. The final tier, Shattering Void tier, was to break through one's shackles and become a god. It was a bridge that led to the other side, and could be considered as the step to escape. However, there was an ancient elite who had mentioned that every tier could actually be cultivated to the extreme level, and then cultivated to perfection. The handwritten note that Ling Han had obtained only mentioned that in element gathering tier, one could form the 10th origin nucleus and break through the extreme number of 9, capturing the step to escape and truly achieving perfection. The benefits of such a level were endless. One had to know that after element gathering tier was the gushing spring, which was to transform one origin nucleus after another into the mouth of a spring that gushed out origin power. And after the gushing spring was the spiritual ocean, which was to transform the mouth of the spring into an endless sea of origin power. Spiritual pedestal, flower blossom, spiritual infant, deity transformation, heaven tier. The following tiers were all closely related to it. From this point alone, it could be said that element gathering tier was the foundation of martial arts, and had extremely far-reaching implications. Body refining tier only tempered one's flesh and blood, tendons and bones, while element gathering tier opened up one's dantian. It could be said that one had truly embarked on the path of cultivation. Thus, cultivating the extreme level of the human body in element gathering tier and reaching perfection would bring about lifelong benefits. The problem was that ancient almighty being had only mentioned a theoretical possibility, and had not actually done it himself. That was because he had only considered this problem after he had reached a very high tier. However, time could not be reversed, and he had to start cultivating from element gathering tier all over again. There was a huge gap in the martial arts of this continent, and a large number of pill recipes had also been lost. Presumably, some great calamity had happened in the era of that almighty being. In any case, this idea of his did not spread and was not put into practice, but was lost in the annals of history, until the handkerchief was discovered by Ling Han. For Ling Han at that time, this handkerchief was of course useless, but who would have thought that his physical body would be shattered by the Black Tower, and his soul would be reborn in the body of a young man after 10,000 years, giving him a chance to start all over again. It's as if there is some mysterious will of the heavens. Ling Han rubbed his chin, looking a bit hesitant. Forming the 10th nucleus was no joke. 9 was the extreme number, and that was an absolute balance. However, forcefully inserting the 10th nucleus would undoubtedly break this balance and lead to a great calamity. Otherwise, with so many elites and geniuses over the generations, how could none of them have thought of 10 nuclei, or even 20 nuclei? This naturally showed how difficult it was to take this step, or even impossible. Forget it, I'll think about it after I reach the peak period of the 9th layer. Ling Han shook his head, and no longer bothered thinking about this matter. At noon he received a piece of good news and a piece of bad news. The good news was that Mo Gao had come out of seclusion, and had successfully advanced to Gushing Spring Tier. Congratulations on breaking through, Teacher Mo. After Ling Han sensed a powerful wave of origin power, he immediately rushed to Mo Gao's courtyard. Sure enough, he soon saw Mo Gao walk out from his room. Although he looked a bit sloppy, his spirit was shockingly strong. Ha 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 ha, after delaying it for more than 10 years, I've finally broken through, Mo Gao said ruefully. I believe that with Teacher Mo's heart of sword intent, you'll be able to easily cut through the obstacles of martial arts and advance to a higher cultivation level, Ling Han said with a smile. This was not an exaggeration. With a sword heart that was close to forming, Mo Gao's future cultivation path would be smooth sailing. As the saying went, great talents mature slowly, and he was about to welcome a great explosion. Mo Gao smiled. As a martial artist, how could he not desire to increase his cultivation level? It was just that in comparison he was more passionate about the sword. Now that his sword heart was forming, his cultivation level was also increasing, so how could he not be satisfied? Your cultivation level? Mo Gao's expression suddenly changed. He pointed a finger at Ling Han. His face filled with astonishment. 9th layer of element gathering tier. He suddenly felt like he was going to faint. Previously, when Ling Han had just arrived, he was only in the 5th layer of element gathering tier. But only a little more than a month had passed, and this guy had already advanced to the 9th layer of element gathering tier. It was very likely that it would not be long before Ling Han surpassed him. What a freak. Ling Han nodded and said, the advancement of my cultivation level is indeed a bit slow. He even sighed. Showing off. Even with Mo Gao's cultivation of sword heart, he could not help but want to burst out in profanity. This brat was really too good at showing off. Get lost, he said in exasperation. Ling Han laughed loudly, then took his leave. Mo Gao had just broken through, so he needed some time to stabilize his cultivation level. And the bad news was brought by Lu Yutong. Actually, this news had long since been expected, but it had just arrived a bit too late. The ready-made clothing stores that Ling Han had opened had all been robbed and destroyed the night before. Now the doors of the stores had been smashed, and the clothes had either been robbed or torn to pieces. Not a single store was still open. Obviously, this was the beginning of Chun Yunxiang's, or rather Sun Ziyan's counterattack. Yesterday's peaceful mediation had failed, so they began to take action that very night. They had probably mobilized the power of the earth and water faction. Those ruffians were naturally very skilled at doing this kind of thing. What do we do now? Lu Yutong asked Ling Han. Since our opponents are not playing by the rules, then we can only use force. Ling Han smiled faintly. Lu Yutong was shocked and said, you have to kill your way to the Chun clan residence. Sun Ziyan will definitely be able to guess that the Chun clan residence will definitely be heavily guarded today, and there might even be the presence of the Imperial Guards. If you start a fight with the Imperial Guards, then no one will be able to save you. The Imperial Guards represented the Imperial clan. Starting a fight with the Imperial Guards would be no different from starting a rebellion. Ling Han broke into a grin and said, since that grandson wants to play, then I'll play with him. Anyways, I have nothing to do now, so let's go to the Earth and Water faction and deal with this lackey first. Lu Yutong felt even more dizzy, and said, the sect leader of the Earth and Water faction, Yang Tiandu, is in the spiritual ocean tier. And so we have to make a trip to the Heaven Military Hall first, Ling Han said with a smile. Chapter 144. Tan Weiqi immediately lowered his head and admitted his mistake, saying, young Master Han, I was blind. please forgive me, young Master Han. Though Kong Wenhui was displeased, seeing that even Tan Weiqi had lowered his head. How could he remain firm? He also lowered his head and said, I was wrong, please forgive me, young Master Han. Get lost. Ziyan pointed a slender finger and shouted at the two of them. The two of them secretly thought that they were lucky, and hurriedly tried to escape. Who allowed you to leave? Ling Han spoke up. Ziyan could not help but look displeased. She was the third imperial prince's most trusted person, and anyone who saw her in the entire imperial city would have to address her as Lady Ziyan and be polite. But she had already mediated, yet Ling Han still did not give up. Was he purposely making her lose face? Tan Weiqi and Kong Wenhui observed their expressions, and were instantly delighted. As long as the relationship between Ling Han and Ziyan became strained, then they would immediately be able to regain the upper hand. Meanwhile, Li Hao and Zhu Shui became nervous about Ling Han's aggressiveness. Does young Master Han have any other instructions? Tan Weiqi asked respectfully. He knew that the more respectful he acted now, and the more arrogant Ling Han was, the more it would arouse Ziyan's disgust. I've already said it just now. The two of you will dance a striptease here for an hour, and this matter will only be considered settled today, Ling Han said. Young Master Han, a gentleman would rather be killed than humiliated. Kong Wenhui was obviously an expert in the area of scheming, and immediately cooperated with Tan Weiqi, deliberately showing an extremely angry expression. Who would believe that he was the one who had first suggested for Zhu Shui to dance a striptease? As expected, Ziyan's displeasure became even greater. She did not notice the entire process of the matter, and only knew that it was Ling Han who was being too overbearing. However, Ling Han was someone whom the third imperial prince wanted to befriend, so she similarly did not dare to offend him. She said, Young Master Han, isn't this a bit too much? Why don't you let them prepare some gifts of thanks, and apologize to young Master Han and his two friends tomorrow? We will listen to Lady Ziyan's instructions. Tan Weiqi and Kong Wenhui immediately nodded respectfully. Brother Ling, forget it. Li Hao and Zhu Shui also tried to persuade him. Ling Han was unmoved and said, There's no need to go through so much trouble. Let's just do a striptease here today and we'll be even. Don't go too far. I don't believe you dare kill anyone, shouted Kong Wenhui, trying to provoke him. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, With the laws of the empire in place, who would dare to disobey them? However, it's only the two of you who are insignificant characters, so it would be best for you to obediently jump. Otherwise, I will strip off your clothes and hang you on this street to dry for 3 days and 3 nights. Young Master Han. Ziyan could not help but interrupt, a sliver of coldness on her pretty face. What? Do you have a problem with that? Ling Han walked towards her. Ha 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 ha. How is that possible? A long laugh rang out as the third prince strode out. These two actually dared to delay my meeting with Brother Ling. How could they not be severely punished? Third prince. Tan Weiqi and Kong Wenhui exclaimed at the same time. They had not thought that the relationship between Ling Han and the third prince would be so good. Only now did Kong Wenhui guess Ziyan's identity, and he could not help but tremble in fear. That was the third prince, an imperial prince who held real power, and might even have the chance to inherit the throne in the future. Ziyan immediately retreated and stood behind the third prince, as if she was his shadow. You heard Ling Han's words. Just dance here, the third prince said lightly, but his tone was stern that could not be refused. This was the aura of someone in a superior position. Tan Weiqi and Kong Wenhui looked like they were struggling, but in the end did not dare to disobey. They began to take off their clothes, full of humiliation. Brother Ling, please, the third prince said with a smile. With his status, he naturally would not stay here to do a striptease with 2 men. You don't mind if I bring 2 friends with me, right? Ling Han asked with a smile. Of course not. The third prince laughed loudly. Ling Han smiled at Li Hao and Zhu Shui and said, If you two have nothing else to do, then join us. Really? Li Hao and Zhu Shui's heartbeats instantly sped up. That was the third prince. If they could have a meal with him, who would dare to bully them in the imperial city in the future? Ling Han must have thought of this as well, which was why he had invited them. Instantly they felt a strong sense of gratitude. Of course you can, Ling Han said with a smile. Then many thanks, big brother Ling, many thanks, third prince. Li Hao and Zhu Shuiyi both said. Their eyes filled with passion as they looked at Ling Han. This guy had only arrived in the imperial city for a few days, and he had already become an honored guest of the third prince. He was really too awesome. The five of them turned around and entered the cherishing flower pavilion. As for the pitiful Tan Weiqi and Kong Wenhui, they continued to perform a striptease. Even if the third prince and the others were not here, they did not dare to take the chance to run away. Otherwise, if the third prince pursued them, the consequences would be extremely serious. Two grown men taking off their clothes in public, and dancing as they did so. What a rare sight it was, and it instantly attracted the attention of the crowd. How immoral, they're actually doing a striptease here. The key is that there are two men. If there were two beauties, that would be much better. Che, those two little birds of yours, they're not even half the size of mine. Come on, if you expose your little birds in front of so many people, you might end up shrinking even smaller than them. Is there anyone who can take care of this? Two grown men doing a striptease in the middle of a busy city. Wouldn't it be bad if little children saw them? Everyone started to tease them, causing Tan Weiqi and Kong Wenhui to be on the verge of tears. Big brother Tan, what should we do? Kong Wenhui asked with a tearful expression. This time, not only had he lost face, he would definitely drag the clan behind him into becoming a laughingstock. In the future, his status in the clan would also fall because of this. Shut up. Tan Heqi's expression was murderous. If it were not for his relationship with Kong Wenhui, how could he possibly have fallen to such a state? He hated Ling Han, but he hated Kong Wenhui even more. Seeing the two grown men swaying their little birds coyly, everyone laughed loudly. After entering the cherishing flower pavilion, Ling Han had completely forgotten about Kong Wenhui and Tan Heqi. He would not go so far as to hold a grudge against these two minor characters. Of course, if they did not admit defeat today, then what awaited them would definitely be a thunderous blow. The third imperial prince had reserved a side courtyard, and by now there were already many guests. When it came to Ling Han, they all looked very strange and began to guess his identity. Not only did the third imperial prince send out Miss Ziyan to receive him, he even went out himself. Come, let me introduce to everyone. This is brother Ling Han, Fu Yuanshang's close friend, and is also on very good terms with Wu Songlin, Grandmaster Wu. The third imperial prince said with a smile. When he found out that Ling Han was actually Wu Songlin's representative, he was given a great shock. There were only two black-grade high-level alchemists in Rain Country, and they both had a very deep relationship with Ling Han, so he did not dare to be negligent. The others all exclaimed in shock. Close friend, how could these words be used so carelessly? It was more refreshing to read on one's phone. Chapter 145. Ling Han could have been a trump card for the third imperial prince, but why did he have to use it so soon? That was because he was in the crucial period of the competition for the throne. The people invited to the banquet today were all outstanding descendants of the mid-level clans of the imperial city. If he could make them declare their loyalty to him, that would be equivalent to gaining the approval of these clans. Not to underestimate these clans, the hundreds of mid-level clans added together would also be a considerable force of influence. More importantly, the 8 great clans were too aloof. No matter which imperial prince ascended to the throne, they would still be the 8 great clans, and would not advance or retreat. On the contrary, every Rain Emperor had to coordinate the relationship between the 8 great clans. They were the pillars of the nation. Thus, it was impossible to win over the 8 great clans, so the third imperial prince could only focus his attention on the mid-level clans. Why were only 30 or so people here today? That was because the other mid-level clans had already been divided between him, the eldest imperial prince, and the 7th imperial prince. Only these indecisive clans were left. In the end, no matter which imperial prince ascended to the throne, the clans that stood on the wrong side would definitely be ostracized, and it was not impossible for them to dejectedly leave the imperial city. Hearing that Ling Han actually had the backing of 2 great black-grade high-level alchemists, everyone looked shocked. Too awesome, right? However, the status of alchemists was aloof, and they would not actively participate in the power struggle. Now that Ling Han and the third imperial prince seemed to be very close, did this mean that the third imperial prince had the support of two great alchemists? Heavens, that would be incredible. With the support of these two awesome masters, even if the current reign country already had a successor for the throne, they would still have to reconsider, lest after the new emperor ascended to the throne, these two super alchemists would not be cooperative and fight with each other. In the competition for the throne among the three imperial princes, the third imperial prince originally had a higher chance of winning, and now that he suddenly had the support of two great alchemists, he was instantly assured. Thinking this way, these young people instantly became extremely friendly, and lowered their stance even more. Originally, although they considered themselves to be subordinates, they still had some pride in their bones, because this was the third imperial prince trying to win them over, but it was different now. After knowing the third imperial prince's trump card, these people all actively approached him. They were black-grade high-level alchemists, and any alchemical pills he threw out was enough to make them go crazy. When the third prince saw this, a smile appeared on his face. This was exactly what he had hoped for. The reason why he could not wait to play this card was because the current reign emperor had plans to abdicate his throne and focus on studying martial art. At most within 5 years, a new emperor would ascend the throne, so he had to make the best use of his time. Ha ha ha, let's drink. The third prince raised his wine cup. Immediately everyone raised their cups. When the third prince finished his wine, the others naturally did not dare to leave any wine in their cups. They drank it all and only sat down after the third prince sat down. The third imperial prince was very pleased with himself. He was only in the Cherishing Flower Pavilion now, but in the future, in the imperial court, there would be even more important figures who would submit to him. The female attendants who accompanied them to drink poured wine for everyone again. The reason why the prices of the Cherishing Flower Pavilion were so expensive was because these female attendants were not only beautiful, but also had an extremely elegant demeanor. Some of them even had a cultivation level of polytier. To be able to have them accompany them to drink, it would give men a very strong sense of subjugation. Ling Han was one of the most dazzling stars of the night. He was accompanied by a beautiful woman on either side of him, and both of them had a cultivation level of polytier. One had to know that they were all young girls in their 20s, yet they had already broken through to polytier. Though they were extremely talented in their own right, they had also required a large amount of resources to achieve this. These two girls had undergone strict training. Their words were gentle, and their movements were light. What was even more remarkable was that they were very good at reading people's expressions. Ling Han only had to glance at them, and they would know which dish Ling Han wanted to eat. They would immediately take the initiative to pick up a dish and place it into Ling Han's mouth. This kind of ecstasy would definitely cause young people to be unable to control themselves and easily fall into the trap of gentleness. However, what kind of temperament did Ling Han have? He had been surrounded by tens of thousands of flowers, but not a single leaf had touched him. He was also not restrained, and calmly enjoyed the service of the two girls. However, his eyes were clear and bright, without any hint of impatience. This caused the third imperial prince, who had been paying attention to him, to involuntarily raise his opinion of him by a few notches. He even had the illusion that the one who had arrived was not a 16 or 17-year-old youth, but a supreme elite who had experienced many hardships and had seen countless grand occasions. Ling Han had the backing of two big bosses of alchemy, so he naturally became the target that everyone tried their best to curry favor with. However, Ling Han had no intention of paying them any heed. He only occasionally spoke a few words with the third imperial prince, Li Hao and Zhu Shui, and spent most of his time eating. This was very normal. In his last life, he had been the alchemy emperor, so how could he be in the mood to deal with these little fellows who thought highly of themselves? Towards this kind of arrogance from Ling Han, no one felt that there was anything wrong in the slightest, because alchemists were prideful existences in the first place. If Ling Han did not have this kind of arrogance, it would instead be abnormal. Seeing that Ling Han was not easy to deal with, they naturally turned their attention to Li Hao and Zhu Shui. They earnestly invited them, causing Li Hao and Zhu Shui to feel extremely flattered. Previously, a young master from a small clan had dared to humiliate them, but now a large number of young masters from mid-level clans were fighting to be friends with them. The two of them could not help but look at Ling Han gratefully. All of this was because of him. The third imperial prince saw that Ling Han was only drinking and eating, and was not like the others, taking advantage of the opportunity to grope the female attendants by his side. He opened his mouth and said, "Brother Ling, are you not satisfied with these two beauties?" Hearing these words, the two beauties simultaneously revealed aggrieved expressions. They were lovely and moving, and even if he knew that they were only acting, he could not help but feel pity for them. "Haha, Brother Ling, if you think that they are not gentle enough, why don't you let Ziyan accompany you?" the third imperial prince suddenly said. Ziyan's pretty face instantly changed, and she could not help but tremble. Aggrieved expressions appeared in her eyes. She was no longer acting but truly felt pain in her heart. She had originally thought that she held an extremely high position in the third imperial prince's heart, but she had never imagined that she was actually a card that could be played. Li Hao and Zhu Shuiyi's hearts thumped rapidly when they heard this. Previously, Ziyan had been so awe-inspiring, but now she was going to accompany Ling Han to drink. The contrast was really too great. Ling Han smiled and said, "Is Miss Ziyan willing?" Ziyan's body trembled again, but she said, "Ziyan is willing." Ling Han, however, shook his head and said, "A gentleman does not snatch the good things of others. Miss Ziyan is the third imperial prince's woman, so it is better for you to accompany the third imperial prince." Ziyan immediately revealed a grateful expression. She admittedly did not dare to disobey the third imperial prince's orders, but being able to escape this calamity naturally caused her to have a much better impression of Ling Han, and gained a new understanding of the third imperial prince. In front of the imperial throne, everyone was just a chess piece that he could use. She had blindly followed him, so what kind of ending would she be walking towards in the end? She appeared to be slightly at a loss. "Ha ha ha, third imperial prince, I have come late. Can you come in for a gathering?" Just at this moment, a clear and bright voice came from outside, but it was filled with a powerful aura. The third imperial prince's expression changed slightly, and he blurted out, "Feng Yan." Chapter 146. Ling Han had already heard of Feng Yan's name many times. At the Seven Wind Mountains, he had met Feng Luo and heard of Feng Yan's name for the first time. Li Hao and the others held him in high esteem. Then during the Dayuan tournament, Feng Yan's name was often brought up. This was a genius that could overshadow Qi Yongyi, Li Dongyu and the others. When he arrived at Huyang University, he found out that this person's ability could rank in the top 10 among the true disciples, and even had the right to challenge the three core disciples. Because of Feng Luo, he could not avoid coming into conflict with him. Today he was finally going to meet him. "Haha, Brother Feng, no matter when you come, I will welcome you with open arms," the third imperial prince said loudly, laughing loudly. Xiao, a figure shot into the courtyard. It was a slender man with bright eyebrows and bright eyes. He had a head full of thick black hair, and it was as if there was a layer of divine light enveloping his entire body, exuding a faint radiance that would make others admire him with a single look. Ling Han's eyes suddenly narrowed. Seventh layer of gushing spring tear. Before the new year, wasn't this person only in the third layer of gushing spring tear? How did he suddenly advance 4 small tiers in a mere 2 months' time? This was even more awesome than Ling Han. This guy must have obtained some extremely great fortune. Otherwise, Ling Han was already a medicine pot, and with the perfect combination of an immortal-grade spirit base and an immortal-grade cultivation technique, who could surpass him in the advancement of cultivation? Feng Yan, even among the younger generation of Rain Country, was famous, and no one dared to underestimate him. This person could very possibly advance into spiritual pedestal tier, and become a powerful warrior of Rain Country's martial art. "Brother Feng." The third imperial prince stood up and clasped his hands in greeting. Though his cultivation level was higher than Ling Han's, he did not have a sliver of divine sense from Ling Han's previous life in heaven tier. Separated by such a long distance, he could not discern Feng Yan's cultivation level. Moreover, who would go and observe another person's cultivation level for no reason? Third imperial prince. Feng Yan also cupped his hands in greeting. His gaze swept across the crowd, and he said, "I have taken the liberty of coming here today for 2 reasons. 1. To pay my respects to third imperial prince. 2. I have heard that a certain despicable person who framed my younger brother and almost caused him to be expelled from the academy is also here. When he said the last sentence, his gaze stopped on Ling Han. Obviously, he recognized Ling Han. The third prince's heart skipped a beat, and a surge of anger rose within him. It was obvious that Feng Yan was here to seek revenge. The problem was, this was a banquet that he had organized, and Feng Yan had come to make trouble just like that. This was not giving him any face at all. He indeed thought highly of Feng Yan, but Feng Yan was only a martial artist after all. To be honest, Feng Yan's cultivation level was not even as high as his, and the only thing that could make him think highly of Feng Yan was his future potential. In terms of background, the Feng clan was only in Gushing Spring tier, and in terms of personal ability, Feng Yan was only in the third layer of Gushing Spring tier. What right did he have to not give him face? In the third imperial prince's heart, Ling Han, who had the backing of two big bosses of alchemy, was obviously far more important than Feng Yan. Thus, he naturally did not hesitate and decided to support Ling Han. He said, "Brother Feng, I was also present during the incident with your younger brother, and I can guarantee that it was indeed your younger brother who wanted to frame Brother Ling." Yet Ling Han frowned because according to Feng Yan's words, he had almost been expelled from the academy. That meant that Feng Luo was still staying in the academy. What was going on? He wanted to deal with an old lecher, but ended up suffering a setback. Now he had just chased Feng Luo out of the academy, and now this Feng Yan had appeared. He did not know what method he had used to drag Feng Luo back into the academy. The academy has already investigated and found that it was all Wei He Li's fault. He was the one who stole the badge that I lent to Feng Luo. And I suspect that Wei He Lu is in cahoots with Ling Han, and is purposely framing my younger brother, Feng Yan said darkly. Fuck, could he not be so shameless? All of this was obviously planned by Feng Luo, so why was it that when it came from Feng Yan's mouth, he became the victim instead? Black and white had been reversed just like that? Yet Ling Han was not the slightest bit angered. History was written by the victors in the first place. In this world, those with bigger fists were the truth. However, what he did not understand was that Feng Yan was obviously only in the 7th layer of Gushing Spring tier, so how could he be so confident and fearless? One had to know that even if Feng Yan had broken through to Spiritual Ocean tier, he was still a subject of Rain Country, and had not reached the level where he could break away from the power of the royal family. This would require him to at least be in Spiritual Pedestal tier, and if he was in Flower Blossom tier, then he would have already transcended the mortal realm. Feng Yan should definitely not be such a stupid person. The third imperial prince had not thought that Feng Yan would dare to oppose him. His mind spun quickly. Could it be that Feng Yan had thrown his lot in with eldest brother or 7th brother, and that was why he was not afraid of him? But no matter what, a mere subject actually dared to talk back to him in his face. This was a provocation and something he could not tolerate. Feng Yan, be careful with your words. He withdrew his smile, and his expression was completely serious, exuding a faint sense of authority. Once the emperor was enraged, blood would flow for thousands of miles. Though the third imperial prince was not the emperor yet, he could use the power of the nation to a limited extent, which instantly elevated him to a high and mighty position, as if he was an emperor, causing others to only feel reverence in their hearts. Third imperial prince, hand him over to me, and I will give you face and not kill him. Feng Yan was not afraid at all, and instead raised his conditions to the third imperial prince. The entire crowd was in an uproar. Had Feng Yan gone mad? That was the third imperial prince, the strongest person in Huyang University, and his own power was enough to suppress Feng Yan. What more when he was the imperial prince of the empire, and his power could be said to be monstrous. Even if the third imperial prince was very shrewd, when he heard these words, his face still trembled slightly, showing the fury in his heart. He took a deep breath, suppressed all these emotions and said calmly, "You've gone a bit too far. Does the third imperial prince not want to hand him over?" Feng Yan revealed a mocking smile. "Could it be that you still dare to make a move in front of me?" The third imperial prince said coldly. He was really angered now. Capturing evil people is everyone's responsibility. The third imperial prince wouldn't be thinking of shielding me, right? Feng Yan strode forward, actually not afraid of the third imperial prince at all. Impudent. Ziyan jumped out, and with a wave of her hands, a gleaming blue dagger appeared in each of her hands. She charged towards Feng Yan. Shwa, 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 the blue light danced, forming a sky full of sword images, as if it was a screen of light. Insignificant tricks. Feng Yan snorted and punched out. This punch of his was terrifyingly strong, as if a mountain was pressing down. The punch had just been thrown out, but Ziyan's face had already turned pale, and her head of black hair began to dance, as if a hurricane had started. Bang! Before this punch had even landed, Ziyan had already been sent flying by a powerful force, and an arrow of blood shot out of her mouth in midair. Everyone was shocked. Feng Yan actually dared to attack and injure someone. Had he gone mad? Or did he have some shocking trump card? Trash. The third imperial prince snorted lightly. He was already angry, and his subordinate had been defeated with a single punch, causing him to lose control of his emotions, and he could not help but spit out these two words. As if she had received a heavy blow, Ziyan's delicate body trembled again, and she spat out another mouthful of blood. However, Feng Yan only stared at Ling Han, and said darkly, "You are very daring." Chapter 147. Ling Han's group moved in a mighty manner. Guang Yuan and the others all had a hint of a meaningful smile on their lips. They were lone cultivators, and their temperaments were wild and untamed, but none of them were idiots. From the attitude of those two imperial guards earlier, they could tell that Ling Han's identity was definitely not simple. Even the imperial guards seemed to be blind to side with him, so this trip was a daunting one without any mishaps. The Earth and Water faction only had 3 spiritual ocean tier martial artists, and a few dozen gushing spring tier martial artists, which was much weaker than their group. The group swaggered through the streets and very soon, they arrived at the Earth and Water faction. Though the Earth and Water faction was a faction in name, in reality it was no different from a clan's power. They had a courtyard that occupied an extremely large area in the city, and all the leaders of the faction lived here. At this moment the main entrance was already on standby. Obviously, after AI Lian had returned to report the news, the Earth and Water faction had already made their move. "Sir, you first snatched the treasures of our faction's disciples, and now you've come to our door so aggressively. Could it be that you think there's no one in our Earth and Water faction?" An old man said darkly, his body exuding a powerful aura. Ling Han could not help but smile. So it turned out that the Earth and Water faction had mistakenly thought that the cause of the incident was the golden flower of the stone. He shook his head and said, "Your intelligence department is really too poor. You've smashed so many of my shops, and you don't even know who I am." The old man was an elder of the Earth and Water faction, and his cultivation level was at the 2nd layer of the spiritual ocean tier. His name was Lu Yu. He stared at Ling Han for a while, but found that the latter's appearance was really unfamiliar. That's right, smashing people's shops was a small business for the Earth and Water faction, and it was absolutely impossible for it to alarm a big shot like him. He had absolutely no idea that he had made such an enemy. At this moment, a middle-aged man's expression changed, and he moved closer to Lu Yu's ear and whispered a few words. The old man nodded slightly, revealing an expression of disapproval. "Fuck, so it's just a small matter like a few ready-to-wear shops being smashed." In Lu Yu's eyes, how could the value of a few ready-to-wear shops compare to the golden flower of the stone? You snatched the treasures of his faction's disciples, and the value of this was already several hundred times that of the shops that had been smashed. No matter what, the Earth and Water faction was the one who suffered the most. This brat must be the young master of some rich family, and had been spoiled since he was young. That was why he acted on impulse, coming over to seek revenge after a few shops were smashed. I don't know what you're talking about, but you keep pouring dirty water on my faction." Lu Yu completely denied the matter of smashing the shops. After all, this was not a glorious thing to say. Although the Earth and Water faction was just a gangster faction in the eyes of the people of the Imperial City, they themselves thought very highly of themselves. "Leave behind the golden flower of the stone, and pay another 10 million silver coins. Then you can get lost," he said to Ling Han unyieldingly. Ling Han snickered and said, "You really are domineering. However, do you guys have the confidence to be domineering?" He began to walk towards the main doors. "How dare you? Immediately, someone leaped out and grabbed at Ling Han's throat, wanting to take him down in one fell swoop. Get lost. Another person leaped out from behind Ling Han, and his sword flashed like water, sweeping towards that person. The expression of that person from the Earth and Water faction could not help but tighten. He hurriedly turned around and stepped aside, only to see that there was already a middle-aged man wielding a sword standing in front of Ling Han. The aura exuding from him was not the slightest bit weaker than his own. Ling Han did not even pause for a moment, and continued to advance. This kind of contemptuous attitude greatly enraged the members of the Earth and Water faction. They all leaped out and charged towards Ling Han. However, those people that Ling Han had hired naturally could not just take the money and do nothing. They all leaped out and protected Ling Han. This was 100 against 13, and Ling Han's side had a great advantage. Moreover, there were still 7 elites of spiritual ocean tier, who had not made a move yet. Only now did Lu Yu realize that there were still 7 people whose auras were not the slightest bit weaker than his own, and his expression involuntarily tensed up. They were in the gushing spring tier, so it did not matter how many people there were. As long as he could severely wound a few of them with lightning speed, it was guaranteed that the rest would flee like rats. They were lone cultivators after all. When they had the upper hand, they were fiercer than anyone else, but once they fell into a disadvantageous position, it was guaranteed that they would turn into a pile of loose sand and flee faster than anyone else. However, now that 7 elites of spiritual ocean tier had actually appeared, it was not easy to deal with them. This brat was really rich and overbearing, actually hiring elites of spiritual ocean tier. No wonder he dared to come here and challenge them. Lu Yu thought for a moment, then said, "Friends, no matter what conditions this brat offers you, as long as you can stand by and watch today, the Earth and Water faction will pay the reward he promised." He could be considered to be quite decisive. Guang Yuan snickered and said, "Elder Lu, as a person we must keep our word. Moreover, we have already accepted a mission from the Heaven Military Hall. If we shirk our responsibilities now, who would dare to hire us in the future?" "You recognize me?" Lu Yu asked. Elder Lu Yu is also known as the Soft Yang Needle. You are skilled in using hidden weapons without anyone noticing. Who wouldn't recognize you? Guang Yuan said calmly. Then he waved his hand and said, "The main character today is young Master Han. If you have anything to say, just say it to young Master Han. We are only responsible for protecting young Master Han's safety." Old fox. Lu Yu cursed in his mind. He had originally wanted to use the Earth and Water faction to pressure the other party, but the other party had casually pushed the responsibility onto Ling Han. This made him feel as if he had punched cotton, and it was very uncomfortable. "Brat, it's not too late to stop now," he said to Ling Han, "as long as you compensate for the losses of my faction." Just as he was mumbling, Ling Han suddenly shot out a punch, and actually knocked the signboard off the door. With a pong it fell to the ground. This signboard was made of bronze, and the loud sound it made when it fell to the ground caused a lot of people to jump in fright. When the members of the Earth and Water faction saw this, their eyes all turned red. That was the signboard of the Earth and Water faction. As the saying went, "Don't hit people in the face." This signboard was equivalent to the face of the Earth and Water faction, and now that it had been smashed to the ground by Ling Han, everyone was naturally enraged. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, "Last night, you all had a good time making a ruckus in my shop, right? Today, I'll let you all have a good time as well." He raised his foot and suddenly stomped down. The power of the 9th layer of element gathering tier exploded. Pa! This signboard instantly split down the middle and broke into 2 pieces. "You're seeking death." The members of the Earth and Water faction were all enraged. They wanted nothing more than to tear Ling Han into 1,000 pieces. Although it was not allowed to kill within the Imperial City, that did not mean that they had to endure when someone came knocking on their door. Wounding someone in self-defense or killing someone was not a crime. Ignorant brat. Lu Yu's killing intent was completely revealed, and he suddenly leaped towards Ling Han. With a raise of his hand, shio, 9 golden needles shot out, intertwined with his unique origin power. They had the effect of piercing through origin power defenses, and were very vicious indeed. "Elder Yu, your opponent is me." Guang Yuan roared loudly. His body trembled, and actually emitted a boundless golden light, as if he was a Buddha. He struck out with a single hand and shouted, The power of Buddhism is boundless. Send one to the afterlife. Hong, the golden light was dazzling and indescribably vast. Ling Han did not even give him a second look, and only continued to stride forwards, entering into the earth and water faction. He smiled faintly and said to Hu Niu, "Come, come, come, let's compete and see who can smash more things. Niu will definitely win." Hu Niu was in high spirits. Chapter 148. Madam, please speak. If I can do it, I naturally won't refuse, but if I can't, then I dare not accept this gift, Ling Han said very calmly. The young girl revealed an expression of shock. He could still be so calm after hearing about the effects of this pair of gloves. Was this guy really a youth? Why did he look like an old man who had been through many hardships? Madame Yen smiled and said, "Since I asked Master Ling for help, then Master Ling will definitely be able to do it. I want to ask Master Ling for help, and ask the master behind Master Ling to concoct a permanent pill for me." Permanent pill? Ling Han looked surprised. Madam has a friend who is in a state of suspended animation? How did you know? Madame Yen suddenly stood up, revealing an extremely excited expression. The permanent pill was a black-grade high-level alchemical pill, but it was infinitely close to earth-grade. The number of black-grade high-level alchemists that could concoct it could be counted on one's fingers. In the past, Madame Yen had also begged Fu Yuanshang and Wu Songlin to concoct it, but the two of them did not have the slightest confidence, and refused Madame Yen. Now Ling Han could guess the effects of the permanent pill the moment he heard its name, so how could she not believe that there was a grandmaster alchemist behind Ling Han, who was even more awesome than Fu Yuanshang and Wu Songlin? Earth-grade alchemist. Everything that happened in the Cherishing Flower Pavilion naturally did not escape her eyes and ears. Thus, when she found out that Ling Han had a deep relationship with the two big shots of alchemy, she guessed that there should be an even stronger alchemist behind Ling Han, or else it would be impossible for Wu Songlin and Wu Songlin to lower themselves to befriend him. This made her decide to befriend Ling Han, and see if she could ask the Grandmaster behind Ling Han to help her concoct the permanent pill. "I guess," Ling Han said calmly. He naturally would not tell her that he was the alchemy emperor in his last life, and that he had seen and heard of every pill recipe in his last life. The calmer he appeared, the higher his position in Madame Yan's heart. This was called confidence. "Master Ling, does the Grandmaster behind you have the confidence to concoct this permanent pill?" Madame Yan asked, trembling slightly. "Sure." Ling Han nodded, a smile appearing on his face. In fact, if it was a few days ago, he really wouldn't have any confidence. This was because this was a pill that was infinitely close to Earth grade, and he could only refine yellow grade pills. However, after merging with the mystical fire, he was confident that he could refine any elixir below the Earth grade. After all, he was once the alchemy emperor. Really? Happiness came so suddenly that Mrs. Yen felt it was unreal. "Yes." Ling Han nodded. Many thanks, young master." Madame Yen bowed, her eyes brimming with tears. Ling Han said, "Give me the materials and come to Huyang University in 3 days to collect them." 3 days. A problem that had troubled her for 10 years could be solved in just 3 days. Lady Yen revealed an expression of surprise and bewilderment. After being stunned for a moment, she said, Shuang, fetch the ingredients for me." "Yes, madam." The young girl beside her quickly answered. Her name was Yun Shuang, an orphan adopted by Lady Yen. She had been pampered and raised like her own daughter since she was young. Very quickly, Yun Shuang brought a wooden box. This was much bigger than the one before. "Then I will take my leave," Ling Han said, reaching out to take the wooden box. "Let me send a carriage to send young master back." Lady Yen pointed at the wooden box in Ling Han's hand. With these 2 items, it would be very inconvenient for him to move. Ling Han actually had a spatial ring, but he naturally couldn't use it in front of Lady Yen. He nodded and said, "Then I will trouble madam." "No need to be so polite, young Master Ling." Lady Yen solved a big problem and couldn't help but be in a good mood. A bright smile blossomed on her face. Shuang, send young Master Ling back for me." "Yes, madam." Yun Shuang answered respectfully. Accompanied by Yun Shuang, Ling Han exited the Cherishing Flower Pavilion. There was already a carriage parked at the entrance. Just looking at the carriage, it was a fine horse that was pure white in color, and there was a pair of antlers on its forehead. This was a cloud deer horse, a type of demonic beast. It wasn't very powerful, but because of its good appearance it was usually used as a mount, and was very expensive. The inside of the carriage was even more luxurious. There were even soft couches to lie down and rest on. There were fresh fruits and fine wine, and one could enjoy all the luxury they could while traveling. "Young Master Han, please," Yun Shuang said. She was very curious about Ling Han. Such a young man could actually solve the problem that had troubled Lady Yan for many years. Ling Han entered the carriage, took out the pair of gloves and began to refine them. Yun Shuang, on the other hand, was extremely gloomy as she sat at the side. She was an extremely beautiful woman, and any man who saw her would want to stick their eyeballs onto her body. Yet this brat was good and he was only paying attention to that pair of gloves. She admitted that this pair of gloves was indeed very valuable, but it was already his. He could use it at any time, but was she someone that anyone could see? What a silly brat. Ling Han didn't know that in this girl's heart, he had already become a young man who didn't know how to flirt. He studied this pair of gloves, and his palm brushed against the patterns engraved on the surface of the gloves, deep in thought. The use of spirit tools was to increase battle prowess, but usually it was achieved through the user's own power. For example, if a spirit tool was sealed with the power of ice, then once it was used it would be sealed in ice for 1,000 miles, and snow would fall for 10,000 miles. It was extremely powerful. This didn't directly increase the battle prowess of a martial artist. But this pair of gloves could directly increase the battle prowess of a martial artist by 1 star. This made Ling Han interested, and he wanted to understand the ingenuity behind it. If he could directly use it inside his body, then wouldn't that be even more amazing? He was unperturbed, like a monk who had attained the Tao. Even though there was a beautiful woman sitting in front of him, he acted as if he didn't see her. Yun Shuang's beautiful face couldn't help but twitch, appearing extremely unconvinced. Too despicable, she was a beauty. Pung, a sudden change occurred. The carriage actually split open from the middle. It was a flash of saber light, and as if it could cut the heavens and destroy the earth, it cut the carriage into 2 pieces. Who would be so daring to make a move in the imperial city? Ling Han and Yun Shuang both leaped out of the tumbling carriage and stood firmly on the ground. The coachman wasn't injured much. He drove the horse, and with the broken carriage in tow, he galloped far away before stopping. Ling Han and Yun Shuang raised their heads and looked towards a nearby place. On a wall there was a young man standing with a saber in his hand, exuding an endless domineering aura. "Fengyan, Ling Han, I've said it before. Today I will beat you up." He cracked a smile, but his expression was cold, and the pressure he exuded was terrifying. This was a person who liked to break the rules. Ling Han thought. In his last life he was also such a person, not bound by any rules. That was because he had enough power to become one of the 7 great heaven-tier warriors in the world. Wasn't that awesome enough? Fengyan was definitely not an idiot. Previously, he had confronted the 3rd Imperial Prince head-on, and now he was openly cutting off the carriage. This was not just any kind of arrogance. He naturally had his reasons for doing so. "Fengyan, you've gone too far. Are you not even giving face to madam?" Yun Shuang said angrily. Was he openly challenging the Cherishing Flower Pavilion to a duel? Chapter 149. I've already given face to Lady Yan. Fengyan smiled calmly. That's why I didn't make a move in the Cherishing Flower Pavilion, and waited here. He had strength, talent, and patience. What a difficult person to deal with, Ling Han thought. To be honest, he even somewhat admired Fengyan, but the 2 of them were already standing on opposite sides before they even met, and were destined to become enemies. In his last life, a few 100 million Fengyans added together would not be a match for a single look from him, but now Ling Han looked serious. The 7th layer of Gushing Spring Tier even had the ability to kill him instantly. "Don't worry, I won't kill you temporarily." Fengyan smiled, but it was filled with pressure. "Fengyan!" Yun Shuang called out loudly. That was enough. All of them did not take the Cherishing Flower Pavilion seriously, and did not take her, a beauty, seriously at all, making her extremely furious. Feng Yan did not even look at her, and simply slashed through the air. Shua! A flash of saber chi danced towards him like an enraged dragon. With a different tier, the power of saber chi would naturally be different. Ling Han estimated that his 6 flashes of sword chi added together would not even be a tenth of this saber chi. But in his philosophy, there was no such thing as surrendering without a fight. Ling Han gave a loud shout and drew his sword to meet the attack, 6 flashes of sword chi crisscrossing. Pung! Without any suspense, he was sent flying by the saber strike. The box in his left hand instantly flew out, but the sword in his right hand was held tightly. As a swordsman, where the person was, so was the sword. What? He spat out a mouthful of blood. Looking down, there was a deep wound on his chest, and blood was gushing out, but the indestructible heaven scroll was already circulating, and the wound was slowly shrinking. And a hint of caution flashed through Feng Yan's eyes. 6 flashes of sword chi. Your power has surpassed my expectations, and your physique seems to be much stronger than normal polytier warriors. This strike, I originally intended to heavily wound you. Even so, his tone was still calm, as if everything was under control. Ling Han wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and stood up proudly. He brandished his sword and said, I admit that you are stronger than me now. I will need about half a year's time to surpass you and trample you under my feet. Ha 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 ha. After Feng Yan was stunned for a moment, he suddenly laughed out loud. He nodded and said, Your talent is indeed extraordinary. To be able to form 6 flashes of sword chi, you are indeed much stronger than I was back then. However, you will not have the chance to live past half a year. At most you will have 3 months. Even if you are in the imperial palace of Rain Country, I will still drag you out and personally kill you. At the side, Yun Shuang was already dumbfounded, completely speechless. In her heart, both of them were lunatics. Feng Yan was so strong, but Ling Han actually said that he would be able to catch up to him in half a year's time and trample Feng Yan under his feet. And Feng Yan was even crazier. He said that even if Ling Han hid in the imperial palace, he would drag him out and kill him. What kind of treason was this? Oh, then bring it on. Let me experience the strength of the strongest prodigy of Rain Country. Ling Han's fighting spirit soared. It was not that he did not have a trump card, which was the strange fire. If he was burned by the strange fire at close range, not to mention gushing spring tier, even a spiritual ocean tier martial artist would die. No need to provoke me. Since I have already said that I will beat you up today, it is useless even if you kneel on the ground and beg for mercy, Feng Yan said calmly, and delivered another slash. Saber chi danced, its power terrifying. Peng Ling Han was once again sent flying, but this time he was much more prepared. His sword created countless ripples, and actually managed to reduce the power of this slash by more than half. Though he was still sent flying and spitting out blood, the injuries he suffered were much lighter than before. Feng Yan could not help but look shocked and said, I have only delivered 1 slash. And you are able to grasp the power of my saber and use a strange method to reduce the power of my attack. What a genius! I am actually beginning to hesitate now. A genius that can threaten me like this. Should I get rid of him as soon as possible? When he said the last sentence, he did not conceal the killing intent in his heart at all. Ling Han's left hand shook lightly, and the strange fire could be released at any time. This was currently his strongest killing move. Feng Yan leaped down from the wall and strode towards Ling Han. With every step he took, there was a feeling as if there was an earthquake. Yun Shuang was shocked, and only then did she realize that it was not that the ground was really shaking, but that her mind had actually been unconsciously manipulated by Feng Yan. This guy was so strong. But she still stood out bravely and stood in front of Feng Yan, because Ling Han was related to the concoction of the permanent pill. This was the most important matter for Lady Yan, and even if she lost her own life, she would ensure Ling Han's safety. Back off! Ling Han shouted. He did not need a woman to die for him. For the sake of Lady Yan, I will not harm you. Feng Yan waved his left hand, and a great force swept over. Yun Shuang was instantly pushed to one side, her pretty face pale. She could not catch her breath, and felt extremely uncomfortable. The 9th layer of poly against the 7th layer of gushing spring tier. This could only be the result. Feng Yan continued to walk towards Ling Han, his expression cold. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. Was he going to attack and injure or kill? Ling Han was on guard. This was an opponent so strong that it almost caused one to feel despair. This little sister is so pretty. Could you let me? It was at this moment that a voice suddenly rang out, and a figure suddenly appeared. He was currently looking at Yun Shuang with a lecherous gaze, and his hands were waving like noodles, looking like he was about to grab her. Yun Shuang jumped in fright, and hurriedly used her hands to protect her chest, taking a step back. If breasts are not enough, then buttocks are fine as well. This person settled for the next best thing, and seemed to be very easy to talk to. This was a man who looked to be in his 20s. His appearance was not ugly, but he could not be considered handsome either. He looked like the most ordinary person on the streets. His face was filled with a vulgar smile, and he drooled at Yun Shuang's figure. Yun Shuang was so frightened that she took another step back. Good little sister, don't be afraid. I'm just a pervert, not a bad person. This person's expression was filled with righteousness. Even a pervert could be so self-righteous? Feng Yan's eyes narrowed. With his ability, he actually could not figure out how this person had appeared, and now he could not even figure out how powerful this person was, causing him to involuntarily feel a strong sense of wariness. How should I address you, sir? He asked. Ugly man, don't talk to me. This person spat, his gaze fixed on Yun Shuang. Little sister. What color are your underwear? Yun Shuang's beautiful face lost all color, and Feng Yan's expression was not good either. He said in a low voice, Sir, are you going to stand up for this brat? You are so long-winded, aren't you annoying? This person turned around and swept a glance at Feng Yan. If you continue with your nonsense, I will beat you even uglier. He turned around to look at Yun Shuang and said, Little sister, my name is Gu Fenghua, the peerless Gu Fenghua, a 100% pervert. He said this very proudly, as if being able to become a pervert was a very honorable thing. Reading on a phone is more refreshing. Chapter 150. Feng Yan's expression finally changed, and he could not help but attack. He said, Let me experience your power for myself. He swung his blade and slashed towards the freak who called himself Gu Fenghua. Bam! Gu Fenghua brandished his fist to meet it. It was unknown what technique he had used, but when his fist was swung out, it actually turned pitch black, as if it was made of metal. When it clashed with the long saber, a series of sparks burst out. After this attack, both of them took a few steps back, and a cautious look appeared on their faces. Sir, you should be in the 9th layer of the gushing spring tier, right? Feng Yan said, a proud expression on his face. Otherwise, you would definitely not be able to block this strike of mine. On the other hand, Gu Fenghua's face was filled with shock, and he said, Ugly man, you are clearly not a freak, so how could you have such power? It seemed that in his eyes all experts were freaks. Feng Yan snorted and said, Stop trying to mystify me. Today, for your sake, I will temporarily let this brat go. Ugly man, what are you saying out of the blue? How could such a handsome pervert like me possibly know such an ugly brat? Gu Fenghua's face was full of disdain. He turned his head and said to Yun Shuang, Sister, I know that you are unusually big, and this shirt is a little small for you. Why don't you let big brother measure it for you and make another one? He stretched out his hand and acted like he was going to touch her again, scaring Yun Shuang into retreating again and again. Feng Yan cast a deep look at Gu Fenghua. There was actually such a young and powerful elite warrior in Rain Country? How come he had never heard of him before? He was a decisive person, and immediately turned around to leave. Pervert, thank you. Ling Han smiled at Gu Fenghua. Yun Shuang's expression involuntarily changed. It was one thing for this person to call himself a pervert, but it was another thing for someone else to call him that. She might even anger this pervert. You really have good eyes. Gu Fenghua gave him a thumbs up. You can actually tell that I'm a pervert. I'm definitely making friends with you. Puff Yun Shuang coughed repeatedly. Everyone could tell that you were a pervert, and this could also become something to brag about? Sure enough, the thoughts of a pervert could not be measured by common sense. You're not from Rain Country, are you? Ling Han looked at the other party, thought for a moment and said, Just now you used the black iron hand? How do you know about the black iron hand? Gu Fenghua revealed a shocked expression. This was the ultimate technique of his sect, and it was actually recognized by a young man from Rain Country. It was practically inconceivable. His eyes widened as he stared at Ling Han. Could it be that you're also a pervert? The corner of Ling Han's mouth twitched. Indeed, one had to be mentally prepared to become a pervert when communicating with a pervert. He laughed and said, "The black iron hand's characteristics are too obvious. When it's activated, the hand will be like black iron, and its strength will continue to increase as one's realm increases. It's definitely not inferior to a spirit artifact of the same level." Gu Fenghua's expression changed again and again. In the end, he revealed a look of joy and said, "You are indeed a pervert. We can become good friends. Why have you come to Rain Country?" Ling Han repeated the same question. "My master predicted that a rare treasure would appear here, so I came to see if I could take advantage of it," Gu Fenghua said. "I'm sorry to disappoint you. Some time ago there was indeed an ancient site that appeared, and a high-level spirit artifact flowed out with the flow. However, it's already gone now." Ling Han shook his head. I came here for nothing." Gu Fenghua beat his chest and stamped his feet, appearing to be extremely disappointed. But he immediately broke into a smile, and said, "However, I managed to meet another pervert on this trip, so it's still worth it." Ling Han could not help but break out in a cold sweat, and said, "Only someone with your looks has the right to be called a pervert. My name is Ling Han, and I definitely cannot compare with you in terms of perverseness." "Haha, you're very self-aware." Gu Fenghua appeared to be very pleased with himself. Then he sighed and shook his head. Since I've missed the opportunity, I'd better continue to return to the mountain to cultivate." Please. Ling Han and Yun Shuang both looked like they were sending him off respectfully. No one could stand this pervert. "Then I'll be leaving," Gu Fenghua said. "We won't be seeing you off," Ling Han and Yun Shuang said at the same time. Gu Fenghua suddenly stopped after walking a few steps, turned around and asked, "Sister, are you really not going to let me measure you? Get lost." Yun Shuang pointed a finger, forcefully suppressing the urge to kill. "Come, my perversion has not reached perfection yet," Gu Fenghua mumbled. "This time when I return to the mountain, I'll definitely surpass Master in terms of perversion, and become the most perverted." After saying this, he leaped, and as his figure rose and fell, he had already disappeared into the dark street. The world is so big, and indeed there are all sorts of strange things, Ling Han said slowly. Yun Shuang said, "Feng Yan actually dared to destroy the carriage of the Cherishing Flower Pavilion. When I return, I will definitely report the truth to Madam, and have Madam pressure the Academy to severely punish that evil person." Ling Han shook his head and said, "You will probably be disappointed. Feng Yan must have gotten some powerful backing this time, so the Academy will not punish him. Otherwise, Feng Yan would not have openly challenged the third Imperial Prince. In terms of reputation in the Imperial City, the third Imperial Prince was definitely not inferior to Madame Yan." Yun Shuang was still panting with anger. She called the coachman over, and they returned to the Cherishing Flower Pavilion together. Meanwhile, Ling Han put the wooden chest into his spatial ring. Since he had promised Madame Yan, and had even received her benefits, he naturally had to do his part and concoct the permanent pill. This time it was a peaceful journey, and he returned to Huyang University. "The security of the Imperial City doesn't seem to be that great," he mumbled. Feng Yan had blocked the streets and attacked, but there was no sign of the army. He didn't know if it was because their reaction was too slow, or if they had not planned to move at all. "Let's concoct the permanent pill first." He began to concoct the pill. With the abilities of his last life, concocting alchemical pills close to Earth grade was naturally a piece of cake, but he did not dare to be careless now. After all, he had to rely on the strange fire to raise the temperature of the flames, and it was impossible for him to control it as he pleased. But for the Alchemy Emperor, this was only something that he needed to pay attention to. Sorting out the ingredients, purifying them, he used all the techniques as smoothly as flowing water. If Fu Yuanshang and Wu Songlin were present, they would definitely pale in shock again, because the speed at which Ling Han was concocting now was many times faster than when he had displayed it in front of them. Previously, Ling Han had only not wanted to frighten them too much. Hong, the strange fire burned fiercely, providing a temperature that far surpassed that of Ling Han's cultivation level. This caused Ling Han to sweat profusely, but the sweat was very quickly evaporated by the high temperature. Even his skin was slightly cracked, showing signs of dehydration. Thankfully, his physique was strong enough and was almost close to body of rock cliff. It was not a problem for him to withstand such high temperature. Half an hour later, 3 different colored flames suddenly appeared on his hands. 3 fire guide, this was the signature technique that he had created. The pill is done. He laughed loudly and opened the lid of the furnace. His gaze swept across the furnace, and he revealed a look of astonishment. The strange fire is indeed extraordinary. Originally, it was impossible for me to concoct alchemical pills close to Earth grade, but not only have I concocted them, they have even reached 16-star. This has greatly exceeded my expectations. No wonder so many alchemists in my last life wanted to obtain a ball of strange fire. It is indeed very helpful. If I can fuse more strange fires, wouldn't the quality of the alchemical pills I concoct be even higher? Chapter 151. What's going on? Ling Han asked. Yun Shuang only sobbed. Thankfully, this place was deserted enough. Otherwise, anyone who saw this would think that Ling Han was bullying her. If you don't tell me, how am I supposed to help you? Fine, I'll tell you after you've cried enough. Ling Han opened the door and entered. Just as he was about to close the door, Yun Shuang squeezed her way in and grabbed onto the corner of his shirt with a slender hand. I say, why do all of you like Nyo who tugs at the corner of other people's clothes? Nyo's fine, but men are like this and women are also like this. It'll really trouble me, Ling Han said with a shake of his head. Hu Nyo nodded heavily, making her attitude clear. Ling Han is Nyo's. Madam. Yun Shuang was obviously not in the mood to joke. She had just opened her mouth to speak when she began to cry again. Ling Han sighed and said in 3 breaths' time, if you are still crying, I'll throw you out. Naughty Lu Ru'er walked out from the inner room and glared fiercely at Ling Han. And it seems that throwing one out is not enough. Ling Han rolled up his sleeves. Haha, damn scoundrel, let me tell you, my cultivation has already recovered by 70%, and I no longer need to be threatened by you. Lu Ru'er said proudly. Then why don't you two hurry up and get lost? Every day you eat and use my food. Don't you know that it costs a lot of money? Ling Han said exasperatedly. Lu Ru'er instantly exploded in anger. She felt that this guy did not have the slightest bit of tenderness for the fairer sex. She and her sister were obviously rare beauties, but this guy actually did not have the slightest bit of affection for them. He was practically a freak. He shouldn't have the hobbies of the opposite sex, right? That was very possible. Otherwise, how could he possibly ignore the charms of these 2 sisters? When she thought of this, she could not help but shiver all over. However, after being interrupted by the 2 of them, Yun Shuang finally calmed her emotions and said, please take me in, young Master Han. Shuang has nowhere else to go. And Ling Han was startled and said, aren't you a member of the Cherishing Flower Pavilion? You actually came here to ask me to take you in. What kind of logic is that? Do you all think that this place of mine is a rubbish dump? 1, 2, 3, who knows if there will still be any more in the future? Lu Ru'er was instantly enraged and said, who are you calling rubbish? Young Master Han, madam is too cruel. Yun Shuang began to cry again. All right. Calm down and speak slowly from the beginning to the end. Don't cry after every sentence, or I really won't be able to take it anymore, Ling Han said. Come sit down first. Lu Ru'er rolled her eyes at Ling Han and walked over to help Yun Shuang into the house. After having her sit down, she even poured a cup of hot tea for Yun Shuang to calm down. Ling Han was Hu Nyo, and Hu Nyo was also Ling Han. The 2 of them shrugged at the same time. They were the masters, so how did they become outsiders instead? Yun Shuang held the hot tea in her hands and rested for a while before finally opening her mouth and telling them the whole story. Yin Tianzhao waking up was originally a good thing, but for Yun Shuang, it was the beginning of a nightmare. That was because she had coincidentally overheard the conversation between Lady Yan and Yan Tianzhao. As it turned out, the reason she had been adopted was not because Lady Yan was looking for spiritual sustenance, but because she had an ulterior motive from the very beginning. Cauldron. Lady Yan probably knew that her son would not be able to wake up in a short period of time, but there was only so much golden cultivation time for a martial artist. How could she allow her son to lose at the starting line? Coincidentally, she had mastered a mystical art that was divided into two parts: the main art and the secondary art. The secondary art could be cultivated by one person, while the main art could be cultivated by the other person. When the time came, as long as the two people cultivated together, the person who cultivated the main art would be able to easily devour the cultivation of the person who cultivated the secondary art, and even his life force. And what she had been cultivating since young was the secondary art, all for the sake of helping Yan Tianzhao. The reason why she had not made her move immediately was because Yan Tianzhao had only just woken up and was just beginning to cultivate that main art. Once he had achieved a small success, he would take action. At that time, not only would Yun Shuang lose all her cultivation, she would also lose her life force, and in an extremely short period of time, she would become an old woman. If Lady Yan had treated me sincerely, I would be willing to die 1,000 deaths for Lady Yan. But this kind of result I am unable to accept. Yun Shuang's eyes had turned red from crying. Too bad, too bad. Lu Ru'er was also wiping away her tears at the side. Her tear ducts were extremely developed, causing Ling Han to criticize silently. You are an assassin, can you not be so emotional? Ling Han thought for a moment, then said, Lady Yan has been in business for many years, so she definitely has an extremely large network of connections and information in the imperial city. You will not be able to hide from me for long. When the time comes, if Lady Yan comes looking for you, will you be able to resist? Taking away one's adopted daughter was a matter of course. Even the laws of the empire would support Lady Yan. If Ling Han tried to stop her, then that would be equivalent to kidnapping. Ling Han had a backer, but so did Lady Yan, and her backer was considerably strong. Yun Shuang's pretty face could not help but change color, and her delicate body trembled. If she was really going to be taken back by Lady Yan, then she would rather die. I've got it. Those two people's injuries are more or less healed. Why don't you leave Rain Country together with them? Ling Han said to Yun Shuang. That was really good. He could get rid of 3 problems at once. Who said we are leaving Rain Country? Lu Ru'er immediately jumped up. I will definitely kill that traitor. It's more like you're going to die. Ling Han dampened her enthusiasm. You too, it's better if you obediently continue to cultivate. Suku Xian has already been tricked once, so she will definitely not be tricked the next time. You two will no longer have a good chance to scheme against her. Lu Ru'er pouted. She wanted to refute, but knew that Ling Han was right. The difference in power between the two of them was too great, and they had also lost the advantage of taking the initiative, so it was practically impossible for them to assassinate Suku Xian. Young Master Ling is right. Lu Feng'er also walked out and said, when our injuries have completely healed, we will immediately leave Rain Country. We sisters are very grateful for young Master Ling's care during this period of time, and we hope that we will have the chance to repay young Master Ling in the future. Ha, if you two leave early, that would be the best repayment to me, Ling Han said without any trace of politeness. Unyo too nodded seriously. This detestable guy. Lu Ru'er gave a humph and said, damn scoundrel, if you ever come to Fire Country in the future and are in trouble, remember to look for us sisters. We will definitely take good care of you. She emphasized the word take good care, and it was obvious that she was very resentful. All right, you can stay with these two sisters tonight, and leave in a few days, Ling Han said to Yun Shuang, pretending that he had not heard anything. Thank you, young Master Han. Thank you, Mrs. Yun Shuang curtsied. Pung pung pung. Right at this moment, someone knocked on the door, startling all 4 of them. Young Master Ling, are you in? A soft and delicate voice came from outside, yet it caused Yun Shuang to involuntarily shiver, and her face had turned pale from fright. Lady Yan. The Lu sisters mouthed at the same time. Ling Han nodded. Kill her. Lu Ru'er's killing intent immediately soared. Reading on one's phone was even more refreshing. Chapter 152. The meat-eating little girl had returned. Hug, hug, hug. Hunyao saw Ling Han at a glance, and immediately pounced on him, throwing herself into Ling Han's arms, burrowing her little head into his chest. Ling Han looked the little girl up and down. Why didn't he see any horns or wings? This little girl didn't seem to have changed at all from before. What was going on? After eating 2 portions of godly medicine, the first refined his skin and the second refined his bones. It was as if he had been reborn, and the change was extremely obvious. But Hunyao didn't change at all. Wasn't he just eating it for nothing? No, some changes couldn't be seen from the outside. The little girl's body must have undergone a huge change. Sniff, sniff. Hunyao wrinkled her little nose, and suddenly a fierce light shone in her eyes. With a leap, she jumped out of Ling Han's arms, and returned to her beast-like appearance. Her 4 limbs exerted force on the ground and she quickly leapt out. Ling Han immediately realized that Hunyao must have smelled the Lu sisters' scent. This little girl was like a wild beast. Not only did she have a shockingly sensitive nose, she also had a strong sense of territory. Now that 2 strangers had entered her territory, the little girl was naturally going to unleash her ferocious nature. Ling Han hurriedly chased after her. With a few leaps, Hunyao arrived at her own room. Without thinking, she directly rammed her way in, and the door was naturally easily smashed. She leapt in like a little tiger, her mouth slightly open, and her hands turned into sharp claws, ready to strike at any moment. Damn pervert, you really haven't given up on your evil intentions. Ever since Lu Ru'er had entered Ling Han's body, her heart had been beating like a drum, and her face was as red as blood. How could she possibly sleep? When she heard the sound of the door being broken, she naturally thought that Ling Han's lust was aroused, and he ran over to force himself on her. She instantly shot up and struck out with her palm. Her palm struck Hunyao. Although her power had fallen to rock bottom, after a few days of recuperation, her power would definitely surpass body refining tier. With this strike, Hunyao was instantly sent flying. However, she immediately realized that something was wrong. That was not a big pervert or a big pervert, but a little girl. Ling Han also came in, his hands reaching out to catch Hunyao, who had been sent flying. Damn scoundrel. When Lu Ru'er saw Ling Han, she could not help but start cursing. With such a big commotion, Lu Feng'er naturally woke up as well. Her beautiful eyes swept around, not knowing what was going on. Kill. Hunyao struggled in Ling Han's arms. She had not suffered any injury from the attack just now. Ling Han felt relieved and said with a smile, "It's just a misunderstanding. The place you're staying in now is this little girl's room. Few days ago she wasn't here. Now that she's back, she realized that you're occupying her room. She thought that you were enemies, so she got a little agitated." Not only was he excited, he was about to eat someone up. The Lu sisters thought as they looked at Hunyao's ferocious expression. However, this place belonged to Ling Han, so whatever he said, that was how it should be. Haha, it's late. I won't disturb your rest. Ling Han smiled and retreated. However, there was no way to close the door that Hunyao had smashed. They'd talk about it tomorrow. Returning to his own bedroom, Ling Han pressed Hunyao down on the bed, and said, "Little girl, those 2 girls are temporarily considered friends, don't attack them." Hunyao pouted to express her displeasure. She hated other living beings in her own territory, but since Ling Han had said so, she naturally could only accept it. However, the little girl was still a little girl after all, and soon forgot her displeasure. She stuck herself into Ling Han's arms and said, "Hug, hug, hug." Ling Han laughed loudly, and carefully examined Hunyao again. However, he did not discover any strange changes on her, which made him feel very strange. That's not right. He immediately shook his head. Previously, Hunyao had taken a blow from Lu Ru'er, but was completely unharmed. The little girl's physique had indeed been greatly strengthened, but as to what level it had reached, he would have to continuously increase the power of his blows to be able to determine. Whatever, he'd think about it later. The sky was starting to brighten, and Ling Han decided not to sleep, but to begin cultivating. He sat down cross-legged and circulated 5 elements heaven grade skill. His immortal-grade spirit base trembled slightly and immediately absorbed the surrounding spiritual chi like a whale swallowing. After taking the godly medicine to strengthen his bones, flesh, and meridians, the speed at which he absorbed spiritual chi also increased slightly. It was not that his spirit base had become stronger, but rather that his meridians had become purer, which naturally allowed the flow of spiritual chi to become smoother, which similarly increased the speed of his cultivation. Of course, this was also because his spirit base was sufficiently awesome. Otherwise, even if he absorbed so much spiritual chi, he would not be able to refine it into origin power in time, so what would be the point? Finally, he swallowed an ancient clear pill to increase the speed of his cultivation. Hunyo became bored after a while, and imitated him, also sitting cross-legged on the bed. Ling Han immediately felt that something was wrong, because another vortex that was absorbing spiritual chi had appeared beside him, fighting for spiritual chi with him, causing his cultivation speed to instantly drop drastically. He opened his eyes, and saw Hunyo sitting cross-legged in a serious manner. Her small face actually had a dignified air. Yeah, although he was already certain, he was still extremely shocked when he confirmed it with his own eyes. Hunyo actually awakened her spirit base, and officially stepped onto the path of cultivation. Inconceivable. How old was this little girl? Normally, one would only awaken their spirit base when they were 11 or 12 years old, or even 1 or 2 years earlier, but this little girl awakened 7 or 8 years earlier. Moreover, judging from the intensity of the spiritual power plundering just now, Hunyo's spirit base was definitely immortal level, actually comparable to his. One had to know that he had a complete spirit base of all 5 elements, and could be ranked in the front even among immortal level spirit bases, so what was this little girl's spirit base? Ling Han focused his divine sense on his eyes, and used a sliver of the mighty spiritual power from his last life towards Hunyo's dantian. Huh! Ling Han suddenly felt pain in his eyes, and hurriedly turned his head. He stretched out his hand to wipe his eyes, and actually discovered that his hand was stained with blood. However, he did not care about this, as he was shocked by the scene he had just witnessed. Was this real? He had felt Hunyo's spirit base, but was that really a spirit base? Ling Han felt that it was inconceivable, and a cold sweat broke out all over his body. In Hunyo's dantian, that spirit base was actually a person in deep slumber. This was a peerless beauty. Although her eyes were tightly shut, causing her to lose much of her beauty, she was still breathtakingly beautiful. Compared to her, Lu Yutong and Li Sichan both paled in comparison. Without a doubt, it was precisely this peerless beauty that was absorbing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, and her efficiency was not the slightest bit inferior to his. Ling Han had never seen this kind of spirit base. It actually took human form. However, this was not what caused him to feel a chill. As he stared at this peerless beauty, she actually opened her eyes, and a terrifying killing intent slashed towards him along with his divine sense. If it was not for the Black Tower shaking slightly at the right time, he probably wouldn't have just been slashed to the point where his eyes bled, but his divine sense would have been directly destroyed. Cell phone reading was much more refreshing. Chapter 153. The soul was a person's root, and if the divine sense was destroyed, then only an empty shell would remain. Just now Ling Han had circled the gates of hell. Curiosity really killed the cat. Ling Han shook his head. If it wasn't for the fact that there was also a monster hidden inside his body, he would have really suffered a heavy blow just now. Without a doubt, the godly medicine activated some ability of Hunyo, or made her awaken, and this should have happened 4 or 5 years later. However, Ling Han felt a strong sense of strangeness, because the spirit base in Hunyo's body, that peerless beauty, gave him a feeling that it was even stronger than heaven-tier elites. In his last life, whether it was the Sword Emperor or the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, the 2 strongest existences in heaven tier, they couldn't give him such pressure. He estimated that even if he recovered to heaven tier cultivation, he wouldn't be able to resist such an existence, just like how in his last life, his body was easily shattered by the Black Tower. This definitely wasn't the power of the mortal realm. The Black Tower was mysterious enough, treating his body as its home, but Hunyo was even more extreme, a suspected supreme existence turning into her spirit base. She was obviously just a little girl in the body refining tier. But thinking about it, weren't the two a bit similar? That peerless beauty, could it be that she was also formed from some kind of supreme treasure? To reach such a level, transforming into an incomparably real human form didn't seem strange. What the hell? Ling Han slapped his forehead with his hand. This life was really strange. Not long ago, a shattering void tier elite had arrived, and he was suspected to have died after being besieged by countless heaven tier elites. Large quantities of 9th tier spirit tools flowed out with the flow, and even a stock of immoral godly medicine was born, forming a strange fire. And now there was another existence that was above the heaven tier in Hunyo's body, and there was also a supreme black tower in his body. It seemed that shattering void tier suddenly became worthless. Hunyo obviously didn't have much patience, and stopped after cultivating for a while. Seeing Ling Han looking at her, she couldn't help but smile, and with a paw, threw herself into Ling Han's arms, rubbing her stomach and said, "Hungry? That's right, this lass hasn't eaten for several days. Be obedient and cultivate. I'll cook for you. If you don't cultivate properly, you won't get any meat to eat." Ling Han stated his conditions. Oh, Hunyo pouted, appearing very unhappy. She did not like cultivation. It was too dry and boring. Ling Han ran to the kitchen to cook. Since the glutton had returned, the mountain of food here would probably be completely consumed in a few days' time, because he could guess that after this round of transformation, Hunyo's appetite would definitely increase considerably. He was already mentally prepared, but Hunyo's sudden increase in appetite still gave him a fright. His appetite has more than doubled. Fortunately, I have money now, and I can take advantage of the third prince. Otherwise, I really can't support this girl. He shook his head. Halfway through the meal, the Lu sisters also woke up. After entering the kitchen, they were immediately startled, and their pretty faces couldn't help but twitch. Is this really a little girl? When it came to the two girls, Hunyo immediately put on a protective expression. Her eyes stared fiercely at the two girls, and a low growl came from her throat, a fierce expression that said, "If you dare stretch out your hand, I'll bite your neck off." Damn pervert. You really are a pervert. Lu Ru'er's beautiful face paled. A young man actually kept a little lowly in his house. This was obviously a big problem. I'm not a pervert, I'm just a bad guy. Ling Han changed Gu Fenghua's famous words. Little girl, come here quickly, we'll protect you. Lu Ru'er waved at Hunyo, but this kind of action was a provocation to Hunyo, causing the little girl to jump onto the table. She placed all four limbs on the table, ready to attack. Forget it, don't lower yourself to their level. Ling Han helped Hunyo down, and conveniently stuffed a piece of meat into the little girl's mouth, causing the little girl to immediately eat happily. Who are you calling ignorant? Lu Ru'er said, unconvinced. Ling Han only laughed mischievously and said, You two have been recuperating at my place for quite a few days, right? Shouldn't you pay some rent or something? Don't you want money? Lu Ru'er said disdainfully. How much do you want? Then it's just SOSO this amount for each person. Ling Han raised a finger. 1 million. Lu Ru'er humphed again. Deal. Since you've accepted our money, we are your employers, and we have the right to ask you to do things for us. Che 1 million. Ling Han shook his head. You should know that if I hand you over, you too will be dead. So we're talking about selling your worth now. Do you think 1 million is appropriate? Sell your body. You're the one selling your body. Lu Ru'er's face instantly paled, but she immediately said, Then how much do you want? 10 million, 20 million. When she said 10 million, even she was shocked. It wasn't that they couldn't earn that much money, but they had just started their career after all, so where would they find so much savings? You're wrong. You two are as beautiful as flowers and jade, so no matter what, you should be worth at least 100 million. Don't be modest with me, or else I'll send you two to the Cherishing Flower Pavilion and ask how popular the business of two gushing spring tier beauties would be. Ling Han appeared to be very passionate. Lu Ru'er blinked, feeling that it was not good to agree, but it was also not good to refuse. If she agreed, where would she find so much money? If she refused, wouldn't that be lowering her own worth? Her adaptability was not good enough, and she instantly stuttered, appearing to be at a loss as to what to do. Brother Ling, don't bully little sister. Lu Feng'er smiled faintly. All right, damn scoundrel, you're deliberately playing with me. Lu Ru'er finally came to her senses, her face filled with anger. Silly girl. Ling Han shook his head. If you want to stay here, then you'll have to follow my rules. Someone who enters without knocking is the real scoundrel. Lu Ru'er knew that he was talking about how she had peeped on him bathing last night, and could not help but feel very embarrassed. She could not help but pout. She was not a scoundrel. Who would have thought that there would be someone bathing in the kitchen in the middle of the night? Were you washing pig's trotters or cooking pig's trotters? When she thought of this, she could not help but reveal a strange smile. This was the so-called spiritual victory method. In the future I'll give you 2-3 meals a day, Ling Han said. He reminded Hu Niu not to get into conflict with the two girls, and then told her to focus on her cultivation. He had originally wanted to go to Emogao's place, but when he thought that the latter had already started cultivating in seclusion to break through to gushing spring tier, he could only give up. Ling Han moved to a place further away, and sat down cross-legged to cultivate. He did not want to stay too close to the little girl and fight for spiritual qi, which would instead make him unable to fully display the advantage of having an immortal grade spirit base. This cultivation session lasted for almost half a day, and Ling Han revealed a satisfied smile. Now, he would be able to advance a small tier every 5 or 6 days, so it would not be long before he would be able to give Feng Yan a big surprise. At noon, Lu Yutong and Li Xichang both came over, bringing with them a piece of big news.